I don't know if I'll ever fully grasp what really happened that winter up at the old lodge near Aspen. Afterward, my wife and I agreed we were never going back, and that meant a lot since it had been in her family for generations. We'd usually look forward to spending a week in the Highlands, especially the kids. They loved running wild through the snow, building forts and snowmen, and just being away from school and daily chores. But the year the snowstorm hit us up there, I'm convinced something happened that I still can't explain. Even now, it creeps into my dreams when I let my mind drift to that weekend. It all kicked off when my wife, Dana, said her father needed someone to check on the property. He was getting older and couldn't handle the drive up anymore. So the plan was for us, Dana, myself, and our 3 kids, Morgan, who was 13, Jesse, who was 10, and Levi, who had just turned 6, to head up for a long weekend. We were supposed to make sure the plumbing hadn't burst, nothing was leaking, and that everything was still in good shape. At first, I thought it'd be a nice little break from our fast-paced life back in Colorado Springs. I was even excited to show the kids some basic winter survival stuff, like building a snow shelter or getting a fire going in the old iron stove. The drive wasn't too bad early on, just the usual twisting mountain roads. But as we got deeper into the Highlands, the wind started kicking up and the snowfall thickened fast. By the time we were getting close to the place, we were inching forward in 4-wheel drive. The kids had their faces plastered to the windows, staring at the huge flakes tumbling down. I remember telling them, just wait until you're out in it. It'll feel like living inside a snow globe. We all laughed. Thinking back now, it was probably the last real laugh of that trip. When we finally rolled up to the lodge, something felt off. I know that sounds vague. Of course it'd feel empty if nobody had been there in months, but it wasn't just that. The place gave off a weird energy. It's a modest 2-bedroom log place with a small loft, nestled against a thick wall of spruce trees. Usually I'd say it was charming, but in that colorless afternoon, with the snow swirling and the sky a flat gray, it looked nearly haunted. The roof sagged under the weight of snow, the windows had a crust of frost, and the steps were iced over. We hustled inside, cranked up the little propane heater, and started getting settled. No television up there, just an old battery-powered radio and a few worn-out board games. Dana got some hot cocoa going for the kids while I lugged the bags inside. Almost immediately, I noticed something odd. The large wooden cross that had always hung over the fireplace was gone. In its place was a dark smudge on the wall, like something had been burned there. I asked Dana if her father had taken it down for some reason, but she was just as confused. He's always kept it there. You know how he is about stuff like that, she said. It didn't make any sense, but I figured maybe it had fallen off and he brought it back to fix. It was unsettling, but not enough to dwell on. That night, the snow came down even harder. We didn't trust the old gas oven yet, so we made Ken stew and ate together. The kids played some kind of goofy card game I barely remember. Everything was mostly fine except the wind. It howled around the place like something alive. Maybe it was just the age of the structure, but the windows started rattling. Jesse asked me to check for any leaks, so I did a quick lap around the inside. The loft was intact, no cracks or drafts. Still, I couldn't shake this feeling in my stomach, like we were being watched. Later that night, after we all went to bed, I was woken up by a strange sound. It was this distant pounding noise, like something thumping against the outer walls. At first, I assumed a branch was slapping the siding in the wind. But after sitting up and listening more carefully, I caught another sound, a kind of deep groan or low growl. It didn't match anything natural. I looked over at Dana. She was still asleep. The kids were up in the loft, presumably passed out. I decided to check it out alone. I threw on boots and a heavy coat. The second I stepped out the door, the cold hit me like a punch. Snow was up to my shins and the wind practically peeled the skin off my face. Even through all that noise, I could hear that eerie groan again, every few seconds, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I walked around the cabin with a flashlight. There were no branches hitting the building, no sign of animals or people. But near the back deck, I noticed something. Long, deep gouges in the wooden railing. They looked like claw marks, but not from anything I recognized. too big to be from a raccoon or coyote, and spaced far wider than anything I'd seen from a mountain cat. That was the first time I felt truly scared. I went back in, bolted the door, and shoved a couple of chairs up against it. I felt silly doing it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, and that it knew we were inside. The next morning, I told Dana about what I found. She looked unsettled. "Dad never mentioned anything weird up here," she said. Then she tried to laugh it off. Something about maybe it being a ghost. But I could tell she didn't believe that any more than I did. We spent most of that day clearing snow away from the front steps, just in case we had to leave quickly. The kids made a snowman. I buried myself in chores, checking the generator, tending the fire. I even started convincing myself the scratches were from some oversized animal digging through scraps. But that night, things got worse. We'd just finished dinner when the lights began flickering. Not a big deal during a storm in the mountains. I got up to check the breaker. Everything looked fine. No switches had flipped. That's when we heard a loud crash from upstairs. The kids yelled down something had fallen. I ran up and found Morgan saying a shelf had just dropped off the wall. Jesse was helping Levi get back into bed. The shelf had been holding old family photos and a couple trinkets. Everything had spilled across the floor. I checked the brackets. They weren't cracked or loose. It made no sense. We cleaned it up and tried to keep spirits high, but none of us could really ignore the unease building in the air. Later that night, around 11, the kids were asleep. Dana was reading, and I was flipping through an old magazine. Suddenly, the radio that had been off started blasting white noise. Loud. It made me jump out of my seat. Dana leapt up too, staring at it like it had come to life. I fiddled with the dial, but it wouldn't stop. The weirdest part, that outlet wasn't even supposed to be active. We'd shut it off to save power, but the radio was still going, humming and popping. Then, for a moment, it almost sounded like a voice in the static, just a word or two. But it made my skin crawl. I yanked the cord. Even unplugged, it crackled for another second before going dead. Dana asked if I'd heard it say, "Leave." I nodded, unable to speak. Not even an hour passed before another scream came from upstairs. I bolted up and found Morgan and Jesse pointing toward the far corner of the loft. Morgan was sobbing. Jesse looked pale as snow. Levi was buried under the blankets. They said they'd seen someone, a tall, dark shape, hunched and still, standing right there before vanishing. I checked. Nothing, just shadows. I told them it was probably flickering firelight, but I didn't believe it. We all ended up crashing in the living room that night, bundled under layers of blankets. Dana and I stayed awake most of the time, dozing off in short stretches. Around 3 a.m., I heard the knocking again, but this time, it felt like it was coming from inside the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and crept room to room. A few times, I thought I saw something shift in the corner of my vision, a dark shape moving just out of reach. Twice I swung the beam around fast, but there was never anything there. My gut was twisting. We weren't alone in that place. By dawn, the snow had finally let up a bit. I made the call, we were leaving. Dana didn't argue. We woke the kids and started packing fast. They didn't complain once. The roads were rough but passable. As I stepped onto the porch, I glanced back through the open door. In the last flicker of firelight, I swear I saw it. A humanoid silhouette in the hallway, just standing there, blank face, eyes glowing faintly. I slammed the door and didn't look back. We barely made it down the mountain, tires sliding every few turns, but once we hit the main highway, I felt like I could finally breathe. The kids were shaken, but they seemed better with the lodge behind them. Dana and I agreed to tell her father everything, and we did. Missing cross, weird radio, shadow figure, all of it. He listened, didn't say much, but his hands trembled slightly. Finally, he admitted that his own father had experienced something dark up there decades ago. That was enough confirmation for me. It's been several years. We've never returned. The kids don't even mention the place. Sometimes, though, I still wonder, was it haunted? Something demonic? Maybe the whole ridge is cursed. Maybe we were just overwhelmed by the storm and the isolation. But I can't forget what I saw. I know it wasn't in my head. Whatever it was, it didn't want us there, and it got its wish. This happened a few months back while I was driving for a food delivery app. I only do it as a side job, about 10 to 15 hours each week. That night, I was only handling a couple of orders since it was pretty late already. I picked up a small delivery around 1 a.m. It was meant for an office building on the other side of town, judging by the address. This kind of delivery was pretty normal, usually for people working late shifts or something. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was completely empty. No cars at all. And it didn't look like there was any parking behind the building either. I parked near the front entrance and grabbed the food. The building was definitely an office of some sort, smaller than most, only 2 floors and not very wide. All the windows were dark except for one light glowing just behind the front door. I walked over to the door and checked the app again. It said to go inside the main hallway and leave the order outside room 238. Looking through the glass, I could see a hallway with a bunch of doors on each side, each door marked with a room number. I'd only ever seen that setup in hotels before, so this was new to me. I pushed on the door and it was unlocked, so I stepped inside. I expected to hear some noise, people working, talking, moving around, but there was nothing. Not a single sound except the low buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. As I walked down the hallway, the first few doors were numbered in the 100s, like 104 and 108. The room I had to drop the food at was in the 200s, so I guessed it was on the 2nd floor. Right in the middle of the hallway, there was a door to the stairs. The door was held open by a wedge, but the stairwell lights were off. I went in and stood at the base of the stairs, looking up. The stairway was pitch black, no light shining down from where the room was supposed to be. The silence felt weird and sent a shiver down my spine. I'm usually someone who follows directions exactly to get good ratings, but this time I thought, this is too sketchy. I stepped back into the hallway. Just then, the door across from me opened. The room was dark inside, but a man stepped out into the hallway. He was dressed in regular clothes, not like an office worker at all. He stood in front of me and pointed past me toward the stairwell. 238 is up there, his eyes said. I nodded but didn't move. He didn't either. He just stared at me with a look like he was holding back anger. After a tense moment, I put the bag down and quickly walked toward the exit. The man didn't follow, but I heard footsteps go into the stairwell and then up the stairs. When I got back to my car, I drove off without knowing what to make of the whole thing. I wasn't sure if I was just overreacting, so I didn't call the police. The next day, though, the police contacted me. The office had reported a break-in, and their security cameras caught my car and license plate on video. They also had footage of the break-in itself, so they wanted to ask me some questions. I didn't have much info to give, but it turned out 3 people had broken in. The guy I saw was downstairs, but the cameras showed 2 others hiding at the top of the stairs, waiting for someone to come up. Disturbingly, several other deliveries had been sent to that same building that night. All the other drivers were smarter than me. They left their orders by the front door instead of going inside. What could have happened in that office if any of us had gone upstairs is unknown. I just hope the police catch those 3 men before anyone else gets hurt. I was trekking along a path I had found in the Olympic National Forest. It was a round-trip trail that usually takes about 3 days to go in and 3 days to come back. I didn't know much about it or how crowded it usually got. But on these long hikes, it often doesn't matter much since you rarely meet many people anyway. On my 3rd day, I passed by one of the small campsites and noticed a man sitting beside his tent. I stopped for a rest, and we chatted for a bit. He mentioned he was planning to stay there overnight and was going to head toward the highest point of the trail the next day. I told him that was also my plan for the day and that I'd probably catch up with him when I got there. After a short break, I left and reached what would be my camp for the next 2 nights. The view was unlike anything I had ever seen before and made for a perfect day of rest at the trail's peak. No one passed by that entire day, and when night fell, I was still the only camper there. I thought about the man I'd met at the site a day behind me who said he would reach the summit that same day. But he never showed up. I figured maybe he decided to turn back for some reason or chose to stay an extra night at the camp he'd already set up. The following morning, I packed my things and started back down the path. I got a late start, so I hoped at least to make it back to that man's campsite. I felt unusually sore, which didn't help, and before I knew it, daylight was almost gone. I put on my headlamp and kept moving, hiking for about an hour after sunset until I reached the camp. The man's tent was still there, standing like he hadn't left. Knowing his plan to keep going and how unusual it is to stay several days at one spot during a backpacking trip, I called out to check if he was okay. No answer. I got closer and told him I just wanted to see if he was all right, but the tent flap was partly open and no one was inside. A tight feeling rose in my throat, like my body was sensing something was wrong. I looked around but didn't find any sign of him. Then, in the distance, I noticed a small light flickering, far off in the woods. I walked toward it, about 40 yards from the tents, and found it was a headlamp lying on the ground. It looked like it had been dropped by accident and the batteries were nearly dead because the light was so faint. That's when I saw someone watching me. They stood about 10 yards away, trying hard not to be seen. I knew this person wasn't the man I'd met earlier, but I felt I had to say or do something. I called out, "Hello, do you need help?" They stayed silent and still. I said nervously, "Sorry, I'll leave," and quickly walked back to the tent. Luckily, I hadn't packed everything yet, so I grabbed my backpack and left the campsite. As I walked away, the headlamp in the woods went dark. I kept going, covering 3 more miles until I reached the next camp. I reported what had happened as soon as I could, and sadly, it was just as I feared. The man I'd met was missing. There were hardly any clues to follow, and out in the wild, it's nearly impossible to search for someone. The stranger I saw out there remains a mystery, possibly the biggest lead that could explain what happened. Still, most of us suspect the likely story behind it all. Earlier this spring, I went camping in the forest about 4 hours north of where I live. There was a small lake nearby that I used to visit often. It was never busy and probably not well known, which made it a nice quiet escape every time I went. When I arrived on the first day and set up my stuff, nobody else was around. The lake wasn't very big and had a grassy shore with trees all around it, so I could see almost everything near the water. Not long after I got there, I noticed a man coming out of the woods on the opposite side of the lake. He set up a tent there. He looked like a regular camper and kept to himself at first. But before sunset, I saw him walking around the lake toward my spot. He smiled warmly and introduced himself as Mark. He said he wasn't sure if I had seen him put up his tent, but had noticed me across the water and wanted to say hello since we were both out in a pretty remote place at a lake most people don't visit. We talked for a while and he turned out to be a really nice guy. Mark was 27, about the same age as me. We both liked this spot because it was so quiet and out of the way. After chatting for around 30 minutes, he went back to the other side of the lake just as the sun was setting. Not much else happened that night. The next morning, we ended up hanging out together most of the day. Mark shared a 6-pack of beer with me, and we sat on the beach having easy, relaxed conversations. When the day was done and we headed back to our tents, I sat by my small campfire feeling glad I'd met him. He seemed like the perfect camping buddy for future trips. Later that night, I was getting ready to put out the fire and go to sleep when I saw Mark walking by the lake. His campfire had died down long ago, so I thought he'd be inside his tent resting. But apparently not. He came over to my fire, and right away I noticed something felt different about him. "Hey, you okay?" I asked. He smiled, looking like himself again, and said he wanted to show me a cool place he found with a great view. I told him it was late to be going out, but he insisted the view was better at night. The way he talked about it made me feel like I had to see it. After all, what's the point of camping if I missed out on good sights? So I got up and followed him to the other side of the lake. I followed behind as he led us through the woods. There was no clear path, so I quickly realized Mark had been there many times to know exactly where to go, especially in the dark. We walked about 15 minutes before Mark slowed down and pointed ahead, smiling like we'd reached the spot. But when I stepped in front to look, I saw an old, worn-down camper trailer. It looked abandoned and had been falling apart for years. Moss covered much of it, and rust had eaten through the metal sides. I looked back at Mark, wondering what this was, but his face had changed. It was cold and empty, like he was someone else. I asked him what this place was, but he didn't answer. Suddenly, fear rushed over me. I looked around desperately, and then I heard the creaking of a rusty door swinging open behind me. I caught a glimpse of someone else rushing out before I turned and ran as fast as I could. I could hear both Mark and the other person close behind, but I pushed myself harder and harder until I lost them. I ran so deep into the woods that I had no idea where I was anymore. I just kept moving, watching the trees until the sun came up. When I finally found my way back to the lake, I saw from the tree line that all my camping gear was gone. It was as if I'd never been there. I stayed hidden and made my way back to the trail, eventually reaching my car. I filed a report with the local police, but they never told me they found anything. Honestly, I don't think they really looked. Thinking about what might have been planned for me that night is terrifying. But at least I escaped before I had to see it. This happened back when I rented a cabin in northern Wisconsin. It was set deep in the woods on land mostly covered with fir trees and thick brush. When I first saw it, the place seemed peaceful. It had this old-fashioned feel with a full wraparound deck and a vintage iron stove. Plus, there weren't any other homes around for several miles. I wouldn't call myself an outdoors expert, but I know how to split firewood and fix basic stuff when needed. The strange stuff started during my first spring stay. A few weeks in, I woke up early one morning and glanced out the kitchen window. About 25 yards away, there was a deer standing still. At first, I felt amazed seeing something like that so close. Where I come from, deer aren't common, but here it was just staring at the cabin, completely motionless. It wasn't grazing or twitching its ears like they usually do. It was still eyes fixed straight at me, no blinking. It didn't feel right. I knocked on the glass, expecting some kind of reaction. Then I slid open the window and called out to it. Nothing. No flinch. Finally, I stepped onto the porch thinking it would finally take off. But instead, it slowly wandered away, unbothered, like it had all the time in the world. I brushed it off as some odd behavior I wasn't used to. I wasn't exactly familiar with how wildlife behaves out here. A week later, around 1:45 a.m., I heard this loud bumping sound. I flicked on the porch light to see a raccoon hunched over near the trash bins. But just like the deer, it wasn't acting normal. It didn't scurry off when the light hit it. It just looked at me with these dull, glassy eyes. Not scared, just watching, like it was trying to understand me. Then I saw it climb up the porch railing, moving slow and steady, not in that quick, jerky way raccoons usually do. I'd only seen raccoons on YouTube before, but this wasn't anything like that. Pressed its nose right against the screen door and just stood there, staring in. I banged on the door, it hissed, but still didn't move. Finally, I grabbed a broom and gave it a hard swing. That finally made it jump down, waddle off a few steps, and disappear into the woods. It left me feeling uneasy. After that, I started noticing more animals acting strange. Squirrels would sit perfectly still on the fence posts, turned toward the cabin, sitting there for hours like they were eavesdropping. Another time I glanced out the front window and saw 6 or 7 crows packed onto one branch, just sitting. No cawing, no wing movement, no shifting around. They didn't even twitch. They were just there, watching. It was honestly chilling. I told a buddy of mine who lived in town. He laughed at first but said, "If it's that weird, maybe get a trail camera or 2. Could be a fun side project." So I did. I bought 2 cheap game cams and set them up in a few spots around the cabin. What I captured freaked me out. Animals would come into frame, stop, and turn directly toward the camera. Even when I tucked it away really well, they'd just pause and stay still for minutes at a time. One clip showed a fox walk into view, sit down, and slowly tilt its head at a weird angle as it stared into the lens. Then it just turned and walked away, like something had clicked off. The point where it all got too much was one evening when I heard scratching on the roof. I stepped outside and saw a bald eagle perched at the top, claws gripping the shingles. It was hunched low and glaring down at me. I've never seen anything like that before. It didn't look like any eagle I'd seen in pictures or videos. That was when I truly knew something wasn't right. Animals just don't act like that. A few weeks later, close to sunset, I decided to take a walk near the edge of the woods. The air felt heavy and unusually quiet. I was maybe a third of a mile out when I heard movement in the thick brush. I stopped, thinking it might be a deer or maybe a cougar. Then something came out. It was big, bigger than a coyote. It looked like a wolf, but off somehow. Its eyes were cloudy, like it couldn't see clearly. Not sharp like you'd expect from a wild animal. Some parts of its fur were missing, and the skin beneath was raw and irritated looking. It just stood there, staring at me with that same eerie stillness the other animals had shown. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. Stood tall, yelled, waved my arms. But instead of running off, it started moving toward me. Slow at first, then quicker, breathing in these harsh, ragged bursts. I was terrified. Thoughts were racing, what I'd do if it lunged, how I'd defend myself. Then it charged. It wasn't smooth or fast like a normal predator, but it was fast enough. I turned and ran. I know you're not supposed to run from something like that, but instincts took over. My legs were pumping, heart hammering. I could hear the thing's strange breathing behind me, like coughing and growling mixed together. I ran hard, clipped a tree, and tore my pants. My knee screamed with pain. The animal was close enough that I could smell it, this horrible, sour smell. I reached the cabin just in time and slammed the door behind me. The thing crashed into it a second later, scratching and pawing like crazy. I backed away, heart racing. I thought the door would splinter, that it would come through. Then it all stopped. Just silence. I waited. After a few minutes, I peeked through the window. Nothing. No tracks. No wolf. Not even disturbed leaves. It was like it had never been there at all. I left not long after that. I messaged the owner and told them I wouldn't be staying the rest of the season. I ended up staying with a friend in town for about a week. I didn't want to be alone. I didn't tell many people what had happened. I just said I needed to be closer to work. But I know what I saw. Something was seriously off with those animals. Maybe it was some kind of sickness, a weird form of rabies spreading through the area. I don't want to believe it was anything unnatural, but I honestly don't have a better explanation. All I know is if I had stayed even one more night, I might not be here to tell the story. My husband and I go on trips every year to different spots. It's how we take a break from our usual daily routine and spend some good time together. This time, we booked a cabin in Oregon. It was out in the countryside and described online as quiet and calm, far away from other houses or people. Since most of our lives are spent in busy cities, this sounded perfect for us. When we arrived by plane, we walked to a nearby market to grab what we needed, then took a cab out to the cabin. We didn't rent a car because we planned to stay just 3 days, wanting to relax mostly at the cabin. If we needed anything else or changed our minds, we could always get a ride with an app like Lyft. The cab ride took a little over an hour from the small town where we landed. Most of the way was through big mountain valleys and thick forests. It was really beautiful and made us both eager for our time there. By about 7:15 in the evening, we got to the cabin. It was completely isolated in the woods. Even the dirt road leading to it was only faint tire marks. We paid the driver and brought our bags inside. The cabin was tiny. The main floor had the kitchen and living space, and a ladder led up to a loft where the bed was. The loft was short though, you had to crawl into the bed, like something you'd find in a very small home. We unpacked our groceries and quickly made a simple dinner since we were worn out from the flight. Then we opened a bottle of wine to relax for the night. We lit a fire in the fireplace and talked about how excited we were for the next few days. It was around 11 p.m. when, as we were chatting, we suddenly heard something outside. Someone was walking on the grass near the cabin. It was loud and very close. My husband looked uneasy, but I tried to act brave and told him everything was fine. I got up and peeked out the window. That's when I noticed just how dark it had gotten outside. I looked around but saw only tall trees and complete blackness all around. I told him I couldn't see anyone. Then I went to the front door and stepped out onto the porch, turning on the outside lights. All I could see was a little bit of the driveway, but no one was there. The woods were very still and quiet, so if someone was still walking around, I thought I'd hear them. I went back inside and asked if he still heard footsteps, but he said the noise hadn't slowly faded. It just stopped suddenly from somewhere behind the cabin. My calm front was fading, and I told him to go up to the loft and stay quiet while I checked things out. I looked through all the windows again but saw nothing. I returned to the front door, getting ready to step outside when suddenly a loud thump shook the cabin. I looked up at my husband, who was staring at the ceiling. Someone was walking on the roof. I stayed inside and called the police, giving them detailed directions to find the cabin. During the hour we waited, we sometimes heard footsteps moving on the roof. About 40 minutes in, we heard boots hit the ground, followed by slow steps moving away. I looked out the window one last time and saw the shadow of the person disappearing into the trees. The police took our report and gave us a ride back to town. We spent the rest of our trip there, safe. The thought of someone being miles from anywhere, deep in the woods, and likely waiting for us to go to sleep or outside is terrifying. We're just grateful we got away before anything worse could happen. This happened about 11 months ago. I was spending a few days with my closest friend from university in his hometown. I'll call him Jake to keep things private. It was a really tiny town compared to what I was used to, but Jake was showing me around. We went to local bars, hung out, and just had a good time. On my last night there, he mentioned a spot he'd wanted to check out for quite some time but hadn't found anyone to go with him yet. It was an old, abandoned area, some houses or maybe even a small settlement he knew about a few miles into the forest. Back in college, we used to explore places like that and go backpacking all the time, so it sounded like a fun plan. Just half an hour after hearing about it, we were already walking along a trail through the woods. There was still some daylight left, but we had our headlamps ready just in case. After about 20 minutes, the main trail ended, and we followed a faint, barely visible path winding through the trees. It took us another hour before we finally arrived. In the distance, we spotted a house, and as we got closer, we noticed several more behind it. It wasn't what we had expected, though. The houses didn't look very old. They seemed worn down and heavily damaged, but had some modern features like siding and windows, making them resemble typical houses. There was even a narrow gravel road running between the homes. It looked like someone had started building a neighborhood, but something went wrong, and they left it all behind. Other people had been there before us, which we could tell from the graffiti covering the walls of some houses. Jake and I approached the first house and peeked inside through the open door. We saw weeds growing through the floorboards, but otherwise the place was empty. Just as we were about to step inside, a loud banging noise echoed through the woods. We both jumped and stared down the gravel road, trying to figure out where the sound came from. After that, everything went silent again. We had no clue what had made the noise, but since we saw nothing, we went inside the house. There wasn't much to explore, but the mystery of why someone would abandon it made it interesting. The house looked like it might have been nice once, before being left to decay. After checking out the first floor, we headed upstairs. Strangely, it was much darker up there. No windows seemed to be letting in any light. The upstairs hallway was short, with just 2 doors and an attic hatch in the ceiling. We opened the first door and saw another empty room, but then we heard something downstairs. There were soft footsteps coming through the grass, moving toward the house. We stayed silent, sure whoever it was had spotted us outside. But why would they come closer? The footsteps stopped just before the front door. A voice called out, "Hello." We didn't answer. "I just want to talk. No harm," the voice added. It sounded like an older man, maybe missing some teeth, stumbling over his words. After that, silence. He said nothing else, and we didn't hear him leave either. We waited a few minutes, still hearing nothing. Then Jake quietly went down the stairs and peeked out the front door. He turned to me with a pale look. "There's no one there." I checked for myself. He wasn't lying. The doorway was empty. We cautiously walked outside and looked around. There was a single line of footprints coming from the direction of the other houses, but no footprints leading away. Both of us understood what had happened at the same time and sprinted back into the trees, guessing that the man had been hiding inside the house all along. We hurried out of the woods as fast as we could and returned to Jake's place. Who the man was and why he wanted to talk remains a mystery, but I'm pretty sure if he'd caught us, we might not be here today. It was the summer I turned 17, something I'll never forget, mostly because of the strange stuff that went down at our family's lodge in northern Colorado. We used to spend a week there every summer, my parents, my older brother, and sometimes my mom's sister with her husband and their kids, kind of like a two-family retreat deep in the woods. Usually it was super laid back. We'd go fishing, roast marshmallows, play card games, and come back with silly stories about who cheated at Uno or how big the trout were. But that one summer, it was on a whole different level, like hair standing on your neck different. And I think the fact that there was a full moon 3 nights in a row had something to do with it. I was living in Nevada back then, still do actually, and that year hadn't been kind to me. I'd had a falling out with my closest friend, and I was feeling pretty bad about my appearance. My self-esteem was in the trash, and to be honest, I wasn't looking forward to the trip. I didn't really look forward to anything back then. But my parents insisted that some time in the mountains would help me reset. So I went, mostly to sulk in the woods instead of sulking at home. Thing is, sulking was the last thing I ended up doing. The cabin is up in northwestern Colorado, hidden away near a bend in a creek. It's a warm, simple place. No TV, no Wi-Fi, and only one tiny spot near the front step where you might get a sliver of signal to send a quick message. We pulled in that afternoon. My aunt and uncle and their kids weren't coming that year. They had some kind of work conflict. That made the place feel a lot quieter than usual. My brother and I helped Mom unpack groceries while Dad got the outdoor grill going. That first night, we played a bunch of board games, Scrabble, Pictionary, even a few rounds of Uno. Surprisingly, I had fun. Being unplugged from the usual stuff felt sort of calming. The next morning, Dad took us down to the creek to fish. My brother is obsessed with fishing, but I'm not really into it. Still, I tagged along, wandered the banks taking pictures of rocks and trees, and tried to clear my mind. It was a gorgeous day, blue sky, warm air, just enough wind to keep it fresh. That evening, we roasted hot dogs and sat around the fire. The moon had already risen. It looked massive, even though it wasn't fully dark yet. I joked with Dad about how bright it was going to be later. Eventually, everyone went back inside, but I stayed out by the fire pit a little longer, just enjoying the stillness. Dad came over to say goodnight. He's a big guy, soft-hearted though. He gave me a kiss on the forehead even though I acted embarrassed, and told me he was always there if I needed anything. I hadn't felt that safe in a while. After he went inside, I sat there on a log near the coals, checking my phone, trying to get a text through to a friend. That's when things got weird. First, the forest around me went dead quiet. Like no chirping, no rustling, no frogs, just silence. It made my skin prickle. Then came a deep, quick rush of air, but not from around me. It was above. It didn't move my hair or anything, but it was big enough to set the treetops swaying like a silent ripple. The leaves all shifted like they were brushing up against each other in a wave, but there wasn't any wind. That's what made it so creepy. I sat frozen, heart pounding. Whatever it was, it sounded heavier than a bird or a squirrel. Then I heard this series of clicks, loud ones. Not the kind you make with your tongue, but sharp, echoing snaps that reminded me of sonar or echolocation. They bounced around through the trees. I couldn't see anything, not really, but the moon lit enough for me to make out vague shapes. The canopy was too thick to see clearly. Eventually, the clicking stopped, and slowly the normal night sounds began to return. I was just about to step back toward the porch when there was another rush of wind and a loud thump, like something large had dropped onto the ground maybe 30 feet away. Then came this awful, high-pitched squeal, like something small was in pain. I stood up, heart in my throat, ready to sprint back. Just before I turned, I glanced upward and caught a glimpse of something huge flying off into the dark trees. The shape was weird, bat-like wings and something wriggling in its claws, something that was squealing. I ran so fast I barely hit the steps before I was through the door. My dad was in the kitchen drinking water, and my brother was half asleep on the couch with a dusty old DVD playing. I must have looked terrified because Dad turned right away and asked what happened. I told him, well, I tried to. My words kept getting jumbled, but I explained that something big was out there and that I saw it fly off with something. My brother paused the movie. He and Dad grabbed a flashlight and headed outside for a bit. They were gone maybe 15 minutes. When they came back, they didn't say much, but Dad looked unsettled. They told me they didn't see anything, except for a bit of blood on the grass not far from the fire pit. Dad said maybe it was just an owl that grabbed a rabbit or something. The next day, my dad, brother, and uncle, he had driven in for the day, went out hunting together. They were gone for a while, so the rest of us just relaxed. My aunt came too, and she taught me how to make my grandma's old chocolate pie recipe. It was a nice distraction. I'd forgotten how much I liked baking with her. She kept the mood light with jokes and kitchen tips. Later, the guys came back with a buck they'd gotten. Dad and my uncle took it out behind the cabin to skin and process it. I overheard them talking about digging a deep hole behind the woods to bury what was left. Something like 20 yards out. They wrapped up the meat and froze it, then went off with shovels. That evening was uneventful. We had a big dinner, watched some random sitcoms. Then after my aunt and uncle drove home, we went to bed. I was sharing a room with my brother. He was 20 at the time. Around 2 in the morning, he shook me awake. He whispered that I needed to get up and look outside. Still groggy, I dragged myself to the window and peeked through the blinds. Something was moving near the hole they dug earlier. The moonlight was strong enough to see that the dirt had been clawed open. Whatever it was had no trouble pulling out the buried remains. It was eating them, ripping at them in a weird, twitchy way. Its skin looked like cracked leather, and there were wings folded up across its back. Crouched in an awkward, jerky posture, my brother whispered, "Is that what you saw last night?" I nodded slowly. We both just stood there frozen. He didn't want to wake Dad yet, thinking the noise might scare the thing off. I tried taking a picture with my phone, but the camera was too bad. It came out all black. I was so frustrated because I knew no one would ever believe us. But mostly, I was terrified that the creature would look up and spot us. Eventually, it stopped moving, maybe because it finished eating, or maybe it heard something. It tensed up, then launched itself into the trees with a clumsy leap. It vanished. Next morning, we told Dad. My brother wanted to stay up again that night and try to catch it. Dad wasn't too thrilled about that idea, but eventually agreed, as long as he stayed with us and we played it safe. That day was tense. I kept looking up at the branches, half expecting to see eyes watching me. My brother seemed excited, but I could tell he was anxious too. That night, the 3 of us sat outside with Dad's rifle resting nearby, just in case. We sat around quietly, flinching at every crackle of leaves or snap of a twig. Around midnight, Dad started snoring lightly in his chair, and my brother joked that he'd scare everything off before we got the chance. We were just about to go inside when I stood up to stretch and caught a glint of something high in a pine tree. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe a raccoon, but the shape was way too big. I nudged my brother and woke Dad. We all stared at the thing hanging upside down from a branch. Its eyes shimmered red in the moonlight. Its face was wrinkled and strange, almost like a pig's snout, and when it opened its mouth, I could see little fang-like teeth. It was roughly the size of a large dog, but with long, hidden wings folded close to its body. Dad barely moved toward the rifle, but the thing must have sensed it. In an instant, it launched itself off the branch and shot into the sky. It moved fast, unnaturally fast. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. We all stood there, stunned. In the morning, we told Mom. She didn't believe us at first, but after seeing how serious we were, especially Dad, she didn't laugh it off. We talked about it the rest of the week. And even now, sometimes, I'll look up at the full moon and wonder if the thing is still out there, waiting for the next quiet night. I was driving across the country on a kind of busy trip. I had some work to do at an office way up in Vermont, and since I was already on the road, I decided to stop and visit some friends and family on the East Coast. On the fourth day of my drive, I spent most of it traveling through New York State. There were a lot of interesting small towns, but for the most part, the road was empty. To reach my destination, I was taking a lot of side roads, long, quiet, single-lane highways. As evening came, rain started falling, and my gas was running low. I hadn't seen any gas stations for a while, so I thought there must be one nearby. But this road didn't really go through any towns. I kept driving in the rain for about 30 more minutes. Through the fog, I finally spotted a sign for a gas station. A few moments later, I saw it ahead. It was off to the side, tucked among trees, and it looked really small, just 2 pumps and a tiny building behind them. With no other choice, I pulled in and parked. I got out and opened the gas tank. When I took the pump handle and tried to pay with my card, it didn't work. The screen was dusty, so I wiped it off and looked closer, but it didn't say anything. It wasn't even turned on. I went over to the other pump. It was off too. I was getting frustrated. It was raining, and since it was well after dark, it was hard to see anything clearly. The place looked old and run down, but lots of gas stations looked that way. Still, when I looked more carefully, I saw a small light on inside the little building. Hoping someone might be there to help, I stepped out from under the pump shelter and hurried to the door. The glass door was covered in moisture, so I couldn't see inside. All I could tell was there was light shining through. I grabbed the handle, and the door screeched as it opened. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something was wrong. The shelves were empty and some had fallen over. The whole place looked trashed. The light was coming from the back, from some kind of lamp, definitely not a normal store light. I was only inside for a few seconds, but after seeing all that, I quickly stepped back outside. I didn't know what was going on in there, but I knew it wasn't good, and it wouldn't help my situation. As I backed away from the door into the rain, I turned around toward my car and saw a person standing right beside it. They were soaked, staring at my car and looking inside the windows. I called out, asking what they were doing, and started walking toward them. They glanced at me, then looked past me. I turned to see the building's front door had opened again, and a man stepped out into the rain. He had long dark hair and looked sick. Without hesitation, he started running straight at me. The person by my car stepped back as I jumped inside. The man running didn't slow down and tried to open my car door. As I pulled away, I heard a loud scraping noise, like metal scraping along the side of the car. I sped off and got back on the road. About half an hour later, my car ran out of gas again. Luckily, I had cell signal and called for help. While I waited, I looked at my car and saw a long scratch across the door. It looked like the man had run a knife down the side. That night, the police told me the gas station I had stopped at hadn't been in use for at least 10 years. Aside from that, nothing else came from the event. What might have happened if I hadn't gotten away in time remains a mystery. This happened in August of last year. My apartment was having some pretty serious issues, and I was left without any electricity for several days while it was being fixed. Since I worked from home, this became a huge problem, and I eventually had to book an Airbnb to stay in for a few days until the power came back on at my place. I don't live in a big city, so there weren't many Airbnb options close by. The closest affordable one was about a 40-minute drive from my apartment, in an even smaller, quiet part of town that people often said wasn't the best neighborhood to be in. But since I was only staying for a short time, the money I saved made it worth it. When I got there, I went straight inside and basically went right to bed, totally wiped out from everything going on with my apartment. The next morning, I got up early and started setting up my laptop and workspace. Just before I was about to begin work, there was a knock at the door. I hesitated to open it because this wasn't my home, but thinking it might be the host or something important, I went to check. On the porch stood a man, maybe in his early 30s, covered in tattoos. He didn't look like an Airbnb host or any kind of salesperson. I wasn't sure why he was there, and honestly, I didn't want to know, so I just decided to ignore it. I walked away from the door, back to my desk, finished setting up, and started working. I had a few meetings and a lot of work to catch up on after being out for a few days. I don't think I left my desk until around 8 p.m., And even then, I thought about going back to work after grabbing dinner. After only a few minutes back from picking up food, just as I was starting to eat, there was another knock at the door. I got up right away and checked again. Not surprisingly, it was the same man from earlier. What could he possibly want so late? I was more annoyed than scared, but again, I just walked away and went back to eat my dinner. About half an hour later, close to 1 a.m., I decided to work for at least one more hour. I was tired, but I had to get things done, and putting it off would only make me more stressed. I put on my headphones and focused for the next hour. I got a lot done, and once I felt satisfied, I finally closed my laptop for the night. I didn't realize how dark it had gotten. My laptop screen had been the only light on. I went to the front hallway light and switched it on. A cold shiver ran through me as I noticed faint but clear shoe prints along the hallway floor. Looking around, they were everywhere, even right behind the desk where I had been working. Terrified, I slowly followed the prints down to the back door, which was slightly open. I don't even know how to explain what I was feeling. Pure horror. Then, moments later, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. They were slow and cautious, but when they reached the bottom, a man appeared, looking straight into the hallway. It was the same man, easy to recognize because of all his tattoos. He seemed surprised to see me awake and moving around, but his surprise quickly turned to anger. His face showed nothing but irritation and rage. I was about to say something, but no words came out. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I immediately turned and ran out the back door. I sprinted through the backyard and into the trees behind the houses. I hid behind a tree and pulled out my phone, starting to dial 911, but I stopped when I heard footsteps running nearby. I didn't expect him to chase me, but luckily, whoever it was ran past me without noticing and continued running into the dark. Once I managed to call the police, I went back to the Airbnb and waited for them. I gave them a detailed description of the man, and they actually found him the next day. They confirmed it was the same person by the tattoos I had noticed. It turned out he had broken into several homes in the days before, doing terrible things to the people living there. I still don't know what he planned to do to me or why he seemed to leave me alone at first, but now I can finally rest easier knowing he won't be able to hurt anyone anymore. After a tough time, I ended up in a shaky old cabin out in the Ouachita Mountains. That's what happens when you lose your job, fall behind on mortgage payments, and your house goes into foreclosure. It was really rough. My wife had died 3 years earlier, and every day since then felt like pushing against a strong current. Eventually, I ran out of strength. After the bank took my house in 2015, I called in a favor from an old buddy who owned a small cabin in rural Arkansas near the woods. He told me I could rent it for very cheap, at least until I got back on my feet. I figured it was better than sleeping in my pickup truck, so I packed up the few things I had left and moved. If you've never been to the Ouachitas, they're beautiful and quiet, but they can also make you feel like you're somewhere completely separate from the world. The cabin sat down a narrow gravel path lined by tall, leaning trees that looked like they were guarding some secret. The place was tiny and falling apart, no TV, no internet, and the porch sagged a bit to the right. At night, the darkness was thick, and the closest neighbor was maybe half a mile away. I told myself the silence would help me think, help me deal with the grief over my wife, and figure out what to do next. The first few weeks were pretty calm. I spent most days at the nearby library sending out job applications. It was about a 45-minute drive, so I'd spend evenings trying to fix the creaky floors or patch holes in the walls. I kept to myself mostly. At night, I'd hear wildlife. Owls hooting, foxes scurrying, raccoons digging through trash, but nothing that truly scared me. Actually, I kind of liked it. Felt like living close to nature. I never really felt alone. But around week 3, things started to get strange. One night, I heard sniffing sounds right outside my bedroom window. It sounded like something with a short nose was breathing against the wall. Wet, heavy breathing. At first, I thought it was a black bear, but I'd lived in Arkansas long enough to know what a normal bear sounds like, and this wasn't it. Bears have a deep, low grunt, but this was sharper, with strange squeals and little growls mixed in. I turned off my bedside lamp to look out the window without glare, but it was too dark to see anything. When I opened the window and tried to shine my flashlight, the noise stopped immediately, like whatever it was decided to run off. A few nights later, I spotted fresh prints in the dirt near the porch. They were big but smaller than usual bear tracks. What really unsettled me was the shape. The toes were very long, and the arch was more curved than any paw I'd seen before. It made the hairs on my neck stand up. Maybe it was just a sick or mangy bear, but something about those prints felt off. That same night, I found long claw marks scratched into the side of the cabin by the kitchen window. They were horizontal, like something had stood up on its hind legs and swiped the wood with long, curved claws. It didn't look like regular bear scratches to me. I started to imagine some local kind of strange bear or unknown creature was sharing the woods with me. Whether it was dangerous or not, I didn't know. I'm no wildlife expert, but every day I found more signs that something unusual was nearby. One morning, I woke up to find the trash bin knocked over, the lid half chewed, and strange grayish hairs caught on the hinge. The fur was thin and patchy, almost like a boar's bristles, but longer and rougher. As the weeks passed, these visits got more frequent. At least 3 or 4 nights a week, I'd hear heavy footsteps just past the porch. Sometimes, when the moon was bright enough, I caught a glimpse of a broad, hunched figure moving between the trees. I never got a clear look, but I could tell it had a thick body, a snout like a hog's, and patchy fur that looked sick. It gave me chills. I tried telling myself it was just a bear, maybe sick or hurt, but deep down I wasn't sure it was that simple. One night I heard low, ragged grunting near the back door. It sounded frustrated, like whatever it was trying to get inside but didn't know how. I grabbed my baseball bat, no gun at the time, and quietly moved to the door. For a moment, whatever was out there and I were just still. I could feel its breath through the thin wood, hear it snuffling softly. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it could hear me. Then it moved on, leaving me sweaty and shaking. Things got worse when it started clawing at the windows at night. I'd wake up to the sound of nails scraping glass, like it was testing ways inside. It left greasy, foul-smelling smears on the glass that took ages to clean. I started to dread nighttime, lighting candles around the cabin more for comfort than light, hoping the little flames would keep the creature away. Besides the creature, I was battling my own grief. The loss of my wife, the stress of being broke and nearly homeless, and not knowing what the future held. The cabin felt like a cage sometimes, but I stayed because it was cheap and I had nowhere else to go. My friend said I could stay as long as I needed. Pride stopped me from asking family for a place to crash, so I stuck it out, hoping the creature would lose interest. Then came the worst night, the night I thought might have ended me. It was late April by then, a bit warmer, and the woods smelled of wet leaves and fresh sap. I was pacing on the porch with a cup of coffee, trying to enjoy the quiet. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up again, that sixth sense telling me I wasn't alone. Sure enough, I heard a branch snap to my left. I swung my flashlight and caught sight of that shape. Big, hunched, covered in patchy fur, with that short hog-like snout. This time it was only about 15 feet away, half hidden behind a tree. When our eyes met, it grunted. A long, low growl that rose to a high scream, and then took a huge step towards me. I panicked, dropped the flashlight, and ran off the porch, hoping to circle back to the door before it caught me. My boots slipped in the mud, and I could hear it breathing hard, snarling, snapping branches as it closed in. I darted between thick pines, adrenaline pushing me forward. I heard heavy footsteps behind me, if you could call them paws, and I swear I could feel hot breath on my neck. I whipped around a tree, almost hitting my face on the bark, and caught sight of the cabin's porch light. I pushed myself, sliding and running toward the door. By some miracle, I made it. I yanked the door open and slammed inside, my shoulder hitting the frame hard, but I didn't care. I kicked the door shut and locked it. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Outside, I heard the creature howl. It was terrible, a deep, mournful cry ending with a pig-like squeal. It was so close I could hear the porch creak under its weight. My whole body shook. I listened as it pawed and scratched at the door. I prayed it wouldn't break through. Then suddenly it ran off. The woods went silent except for my pounding heart. That was the last straw. I couldn't live in that cabin anymore. Within a week, I found a temp job in a nearby town, earned enough for gas, and drove away. I told my friend to keep my last month's rent. I was done. I don't know if he believed my story about the creature. He just shook his head and said he'd look into it. I thanked him again and again for letting me stay, but I never went back to find out if he saw anything. Nowadays, life's been kinder. I have a steady job that pays the bills and a small apartment far from any thick woods. I still have nightmares about that night sometimes. I think that's normal after trauma. Being chased and almost attacked by a big animal sticks with you. I may never know what that thing was, but I learned that we share the world with creatures we don't fully understand. Some might want to eat you, or at least drag you through the wild hills. This happened when I rented a cabin in northern Wisconsin. It was hidden away on a piece of land covered mostly in fir trees and thick brush. At first glance, the place seemed peaceful. The cabin had a simple charm with a porch that wrapped all around it and an old cast iron stove inside. There weren't any neighbors for at least a couple of miles. I'm not really a survival expert, but I can chop some firewood and fix basic things when I have to. During my first visit in early spring, strange things started happening. One morning, I woke up early and looked out the kitchen window. About 20 yards away, there was a deer standing perfectly still. I was amazed at seeing wildlife so close. Deer aren't common near my home, but they're normal around here. However, this one wasn't acting right. It wasn't eating grass or flicking its ears to shoo bugs. It just stood there staring directly at the cabin, eyes fixed on me without blinking. It felt off. I even tapped the window to see if it would react. Then I opened the window and called out softly, but it didn't move. I stepped out onto the porch, hoping it would finally run off. Instead, it slowly wandered away in a calm, steady way. I shrugged it off as just an odd behavior of local wildlife since I'm not very familiar with animals here. Then, about a week later, around 2 a.m., I heard thumping sounds. I turned on the porch light to check and saw a raccoon hunched near the trash bins. Like the deer, it wasn't acting normally. It didn't run away when the light hit it. Instead, it stared at me with glassy eyes like it was studying me. Then it slowly climbed up the porch railing without the usual skittishness raccoons show. It pressed its nose against the screen door and kept staring through it. I banged on the door to scare it off, and it hissed but didn't move. I grabbed a broom and swung it at the animal, finally making it jump down, waddle a few steps, and disappear into the woods. That whole incident really unsettled me. After that, more animals started acting strangely. Squirrels would sit on the fence post for hours, all facing the cabin like they were listening. One day, I looked out the front window and saw about 6 crows perched silently on a single branch. None of them made a sound, flapped their wings, or moved their heads. They just sat frozen, watching the cabin. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. I tried telling a friend from the nearby town, but he just laughed and said, if I found it so strange, I should try putting up a wildlife camera for fun. So I did. I bought some cheap trail cameras and placed them around the property. The videos I got were deeply disturbing. Whenever an animal wandered into the frame, it would stop and turn directly toward the camera, even if it was well hidden. It would just stand there for minutes staring at the lens. A red fox came close one time, sat down, tilted its head in an unnatural way, stared at the camera, and then suddenly walked away like it lost interest. Things reached a new level one evening when a bald eagle landed on the cabin roof. I heard the scratching of its talons on the shingles. I ran outside and saw it sitting on the peak, staring at me with a harsh glare. That's when I truly felt that something was wrong. Animals don't behave like that normally. The last straw happened about a month later. It was almost dusk, and I decided to take a walk near the edge of the trees. The air was thick and still. I was maybe a quarter mile from the cabin when I heard rustling in the bushes. I froze, expecting to see a deer or maybe a bobcat. Instead, a large shape appeared, definitely bigger than a coyote. It looked like a wolf or something close to it. Its eyes were strange, cloudy, not sharp like you'd see in nature shows. Parts of its fur were missing, and its exposed skin looked raw. It was staring at me with the same dull, eerie look I'd seen in the other animals. I did what I thought was right. I made myself look bigger and made noise, but instead of backing off, it slowly stepped closer. I could hear it breathing heavily, making rough, rasping sounds. Primal fear took hold of me. Thoughts of how this thing might attack and how I'd defend myself raced through my mind. Then it charged, running unevenly but fast enough to close the distance quickly. I turned and ran like crazy. I know you're not supposed to run from a predator, but instinct took over. My heart was pounding as I sprinted back to the cabin. I could hear ragged growling behind me, almost like a cough. I barely dodged a tree, tearing my pants. My knee hurt badly. The wolf was so close I could smell it. I slammed the front door behind me and nearly had a heart attack when the wolf slammed into the door, clawing and scraping at it. That was not normal behavior. I wondered if it had rabies or if maybe all these animals were sick somehow. Just as I was starting to think the door might break, everything stopped. There was silence. The door held firm. A few minutes later, I looked out the window. There was no sign of the wolf, no tracks, no disturbed leaves, nothing. It had simply vanished. I left the cabin soon after. I told the owner I wasn't staying for the rest of the rental. Instead, I stayed with a friend in town for about a week because I didn't want to be alone after all that. I never made a big deal about what happened. Mostly, I told people at work that I just wanted to be closer to town for a while. But I know what I saw. Something was definitely wrong with those animals. Maybe it was some kind of rabies outbreak or something even worse. I don't want to say it was anything supernatural, but I don't have any good answers either. I'm pretty sure if I'd stayed out there longer, I might not have made it out safe. I'm not sure if I'll ever really understand what happened that winter at the old cabin in Montana. After that trip, my wife and I decided never to go back. And that's saying a lot since the cabin had been in her family for generations. Usually, we all looked forward to spending time in the mountains, especially the kids. They loved running around in the snow, making snowmen, and just getting away from school and chores for a bit. But the year we went and the big snowstorm hit, something happened that I can't explain, and it still haunts me when I think back. It began when my wife, Sarah, said her dad needed someone to check on the cabin. He was getting older and couldn't make the trip up there much anymore. So the plan was for the 5 of us, me, Sarah, and our kids Lily, who was 15, Jake, who was 10, and Noah, who was 6, to spend a long weekend up there. We'd make sure the pipes weren't frozen, that everything was in good shape, that kind of thing. At first, I thought it would be a nice break from the busy life we had back in Billings. I was excited to teach the kids some winter survival skills, maybe build a snow shelter or at least a snow fort, and show them how to safely light the old wood stove. The drive up was fine at first, just the usual winding mountain roads. But as we climbed higher, the wind got stronger and the snow started falling heavier. By the time we were near the cabin, we were barely moving, driving slow in 4-wheel drive. The kids pressed their faces against the windows, amazed by the big snowflakes swirling all around us. I told them to wait until they were outside. It'd feel like they were inside a snow globe. We laughed, but looking back, that was probably the last real laugh we had the whole trip. When we finally arrived at the cabin, it felt strangely empty. I know that sounds odd. Of course it's empty if no one has been there for months. But there was something more to it. It's a small 2-bedroom cabin with a loft, sitting among tall pine trees. Usually it's kind of cozy, but in the gray and white snowstorm that afternoon, it looked kind of scary. The roof was sagging under the weight of the snow, the windows partly covered in frost, and the front steps were icy. We hurried inside, turning on the little heater and starting to settle in. There's no TV up there, just an old radio and some board games. Sarah started making hot chocolate for the kids while I brought in the bags. Almost right away, I noticed something strange. The big wooden cross that always hung near the fireplace was gone. In its place was a small, dark stain on the wall, like something had been burned there. I asked Sarah if her dad had taken it down for some reason, but she didn't know. He was very religious and always kept it there. She suggested maybe it had fallen off and he took it home to fix it. It was a creepy thing to notice, but I told myself it was probably nothing. That night, the snow kept falling harder than I'd ever seen. We had canned soup for dinner because we didn't want to risk the old oven. We played some silly game with the kids. I don't even remember which one. Everything seemed normal except for the wind, which howled like it was alive. Either the cabin was old or the storm was fierce, because the windows started to shake and rattle. Jake asked if I could check for leaks, so I walked around the cabin. The loft windows were fine, no cracks or anything, but I kept getting this uneasy feeling, like someone was watching me. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I woke up to a strange noise. It was a banging sound, like something hitting the walls from outside. At first, I thought maybe a tree branch was banging in the wind, but then I heard a low growl or moan mixed in with the banging. I looked over at Sarah, who was still asleep, and knew the kids were probably sleeping up in the loft. I decided to check outside alone. The cold hit me hard as soon as I stepped out. The snow was almost knee-deep, and the wind cut across my face like a blade. Even with the storm roaring, I knew something wasn't right. Every few seconds I heard that low growl, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I walked around the cabin with a flashlight, but I didn't see any branches or animals moving around. Near the back porch, I found deep scratches in the wood railing, like claw marks. We don't usually have bears around there, and the marks were spaced oddly, too big for any mountain lion or wild animal I'd seen. That was the first real fear I felt. I went back inside, locked all the doors, and shoved some chairs against them just to feel safer. I told myself I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. The next day, I told Sarah what I found. She looked worried. Her dad hadn't mentioned anything like that. She joked maybe it was a ghost, but I could tell she was uneasy too. We spent most of the day shoveling snow away from the front door so we wouldn't get stuck. The kids built a snowman, and I tried to focus on normal things like keeping the fire going and testing the generator. I almost convinced myself the claw marks might be from a raccoon that had grown big scavenging around, but deep down I wasn't sure. That night, the real fear began. We were sitting after dinner when the lights started flickering. That's normal for a cabin during a snowstorm, so I went to check the circuit breaker. Everything looked fine, no switches had tripped. Then we heard a loud crash from the loft. The kids shouted down that something had fallen. I rushed up to see. Lily said a shelf holding some old family photos and knickknacks had just fallen off the wall. She was shaken, and Jake was helping Noah back to bed. The shelf brackets looked fine, not loose or broken. It made no sense. We cleaned up and tried to stay calm, but there was a tension none of us could ignore. Around 11 p.m., after the kids were asleep, Sarah was reading by the fire and I was flipping through a magazine. Suddenly the radio, which we had turned off, burst on full of static. It was so loud I nearly jumped. Sarah jumped too, staring at the radio like it was alive. I went to turn it off, but the outlet it was plugged into had been switched off to save power. Still, the radio kept crackling. For a moment, I thought I heard a whispered word in the static. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I pulled the plug, and it finally went silent. Sarah asked if I heard it too. She said it sounded like it said, "Leave." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. Less than an hour later, we heard a scream from the loft. I ran up and found Lily and Jake standing near the far corner, pointing at the wall. Lily was crying, Jake's face was pale, and Noah was hiding under the blankets. They said they saw a dark figure, a tall, hunched shape that had just stood there before disappearing when they screamed. I looked carefully, but there was nothing there. I tried to calm them down, saying it was probably just a shadow from the firelight, but I didn't believe it myself. Something was wrong in that cabin. We all decided to sleep downstairs together in the living room. I piled blankets on the kids while Sarah and I sat awake, barely sleeping, just dozing. Around 3 a.m., I heard the banging again, but this time it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and walked quietly through the cabin. Occasionally, I thought I saw something moving just at the edge of my vision, a dark shape slipping through the shadows. Twice I turned with the light only to find empty rooms. My stomach was tight with fear. We were not alone. Just before dawn, the storm lessened a bit. I told Sarah we needed to leave. She agreed without argument. We woke the kids and they were eager to get out. The wind had died down enough to try driving back, even if the roads would be rough. We packed quickly and headed for the door. As I stepped out onto the porch, I looked back inside one last time. In the flickering firelight, I swear I saw a figure standing in the hallway. It was human-shaped but had no clear features, only glowing eyes. It didn't move or come at us, just stood there. I slammed the door and my heart was pounding. We barely made it down the mountain, sliding on icy roads, but I felt huge relief once we hit the main highway. The kids were scared but seemed to relax once the cabin was out of sight. Sarah and I agreed we'd tell her dad everything later. Privately, she told me she never wanted to go back, and I felt the same. When we told her dad about the missing cross, the strange noises, the radio, the falling shelf, the banging, and the shadowy figure, he listened quietly. He didn't say if he believed us, but his hands trembled, and eventually he admitted his own father had seen something evil at that cabin years ago. That was enough for me. It's been several years now, and we haven't returned. Not even for a day trip. The kids don't talk about it anymore. Sometimes I wonder if the place is truly haunted or if something dark lives inside those walls. Maybe the mountain is cursed, or maybe it was just the storm messing with our minds. But every time I remember that last moment, the shape in the hallway, I can't just say it was my imagination. Whatever it was real, and it wanted us gone. Well, it got what it wanted. As far as I'm concerned, that cabin can stay empty forever. If there's some dark force living in the Montana mountains, we don't want to have anything to do with it again. I hope anyone else who goes there is ready for what they might find in the shadows, because once you see something like that, your world doesn't feel quite the same anymore. It was the summer I turned 15. That's something I'll never forget because of the strange things that happened at our family's cabin in Colorado. We used to visit there every year. My parents, my older sister, and sometimes my aunt, uncle, and their kids would come along too. It was like a second home for our big family, nestled deep in the woods for about a week. Usually, it was really relaxed. We'd fish, toast marshmallows, play card games, and always come back with funny stories about cousin antics or how many fish we'd caught. But that summer was completely different, chilling in a way that gave me the creeps. I think it might have had something to do with the full moon lasting for 3 nights straight. At that time, I was living in Utah, and that year was rough for me at school. I'd had a falling out with a close friend, and I was feeling pretty down about how I looked. Honestly, I wasn't excited about the trip at all, but my parents insisted fresh air would help. So I figured I might as well come and just sulk in the woods instead of at home. Little did I know, sulking was the last thing I'd be doing. The cabin is up north in Colorado, hidden in a thick forest by a small creek. It's cozy, not fancy, and there's no cell service except for a tiny spot at the edge of the porch where you might get 1 or 2 bars. We arrived in the afternoon. My aunt and uncle and their family weren't coming that week because of other plans, which made the place feel quieter than usual. My sister and I helped Mom bring in the groceries, and Dad started getting the grill ready. That evening we played tons of board games, Scrabble, Pictionary, even Uno, and surprisingly I was enjoying myself. It felt nice to be cut off from everything for a while. The next day, Dad took us fishing down by the creek. My sister loves fishing. I'm not as interested, but I came along anyway, wandering and snapping pictures of trees, trying to clear my mind. The day was perfect, sunny with a cool breeze. After we got back, we roasted hot dogs outside. The moon was already huge, even though the sun hadn't fully set. I joked with Dad about how bright it would get eventually. Everyone went back inside, but I stayed out a bit longer by the fire pit, soaking in the quiet. Dad, being a big softie, came over before heading in and told me how much I meant to him. He kissed my forehead even though I was a teenager, and I rolled my eyes. It was sweet, though, and he promised he'd always be there if I needed to talk. It was one of those moments when I felt safer than I had in a long time. After he went inside, I stayed outside, scrolling through my phone and trying to send a text to a friend back home. Then it happened. First, I noticed the strange silence fall over the woods. All the bugs stopped chirping and the owls stopped hooting. Then I heard a whoosh, above me, not around me, like a giant gust of wind slicing through the treetops. The leaves and branches rustled like a wave rolling through the forest. It gave me goosebumps. My heart pounded in my ears. It sounded huge, heavier than any bird or raccoon. After that came a loud clicking noise. It reminded me of echolocation, like what bats use. The clicking went on for a while, echoing through the silent woods. I couldn't see much because it was so dark, though the moonlight helped a little. The thick canopy blocked the sky. Then the clicking stopped, and the normal forest sounds started to come back. I was about to head back inside when another whoosh came, followed by a heavy thump about 20 yards away. Then I heard a high-pitched squeal, like a small animal crying out. I froze, ready to run, but just in time I saw a huge bat-like creature flying off, holding something squirming in its claws. I dashed inside, almost tripping on the porch steps. Dad was in the kitchen getting water, and my sister was sprawled on the couch watching some old movie on TV. I probably looked like I'd seen a ghost because Dad's eyes went wide, and he asked what was wrong. I told him what I'd heard and seen, barely able to catch my breath. My sister paused her movie, and they both went outside with a flashlight. They stayed out for a good 15 minutes but didn't see anything, except some blood on the grass near where I heard the thump. They came back looking worried but tried to act like maybe it was just an owl that caught a rabbit or something. The next day, Dad, my sister, and my uncle, who had come just for the day, went hunting. They were gone for hours, so the women, Mom, Aunt, and me just hung around the cabin, chatting and watching TV. Eventually, my aunt taught me how to bake Grandma's old chocolate cream pie recipe. It was fun and a nice distraction. My aunt always has funny stories and cooking tips. When the guys returned, they'd gotten a good-sized buck and were very proud. Dad and my uncle took the deer behind the cabin to skin it. I overheard them talking about burying the leftover parts in a deep hole about 25 yards from the cabin to keep wild animals away. They cut the meat into pieces and put it in the freezer, then grabbed shovels and went to bury the remains. The rest of the night passed without anything strange. We had a big family dinner, watched some random TV, and after my aunt and uncle left, we went to bed. I was sharing a room with my sister. She was 18 then. Around 2 a.m., I was suddenly shaken awake by her. She whispered urgently that I needed to see something. I was groggy and annoyed but followed her to the window. Sure enough, there was something moving near the spot where the deer remains were buried. The moonlight was bright enough to see clearly. Something had dug up the hole, about 5 feet deep, and was pulling out chunks of the deer's insides, eating them. I couldn't believe my eyes. The creature had leathery skin and folded wings tucked behind its back. It moved with jerky, twitchy motions as it fed. My sister whispered, "Is that the thing you saw last night?" I just nodded. We both stood there, scared and quiet. We didn't want to make noise because the creature would fly off the moment it heard us. I tried to take a picture with my phone, but the camera was terrible in low light, and the photo came out pitch black. I felt frustrated that no one would believe me, and mostly terrified it might spot us. Eventually, it stiffened, maybe sensing us, and then took off in a clumsy hop, flying away into the trees. The next morning, we told Dad everything. My sister was pumped, saying we should stay up that night to try and see it again, maybe even shoot it. Dad was not thrilled. He's a gentle guy but also a hunter, so he knows how to handle a rifle. Still, he wasn't keen on us doing anything reckless. Eventually, he agreed to stay up with us to keep watch, but warned we'd quit if it got too late or too dangerous. That day felt weird. I kept looking up at the trees, expecting something to be watching. My sister seemed cool but probably was nervous too. When night came, Dad, my sister, and I settled outside. Dad had his rifle resting on a chair. Not threatening, just for safety. We sat quietly, listening and waiting. It was nerve-wracking because every rustle of leaves sounded like the creature returning. Dad began to doze off around midnight, snoring loudly. My sister joked that Dad would scare off the creature with all that noise and maybe attract a Bigfoot instead. I rolled my eyes but smiled. We were just about to go inside when I felt stiff and stood up. That's when I caught a red gleam in the high branches of a pine tree. At first, I thought it was a reflection from the cabin lights or maybe a raccoon's eyes, but the shape was way too big for a raccoon. I nudged my sister and woke Dad up, pointing to what I saw. The figure hung upside down, its eyes shining red in the moonlight. I could see a wrinkled, leathery face with a pig-like snout. When it opened its mouth, small fangs glinted in the light. It was at least as big as a large dog, with wings folded around its body. Dad reached for the rifle, but before he could even raise it, the creature spread its wings and launched into the air in one powerful leap. It must have amazing hearing or some other sense that we were about to move. We just watched as it vanished into the dark sky. We stood there, stunned and silent. The next morning, we told Mom. She was half skeptical and half worried, but my sister, Dad, and I were sure of what we'd seen. We talked about it for the rest of the trip and later at school, though most people laughed or said we'd watched too many scary movies. I know what I saw. Dad and my sister know too. We still go back to that cabin sometimes, but never again have we been there during a 3-night full moon. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe not. I wonder if that creature only comes out under those specific conditions. I'm almost 29 now, and looking back, I'm proud of how my family stood by me. It was scary and strange, but they believed me and stayed up to see if I was imagining things. I wasn't. There's definitely something out there. I think it's a giant hunting bat, but part of me wonders if it... Back in the day, not sure how it is now to be honest, if you didn't want to get hassled, you had to hike pretty far into the backcountry just to enjoy a smoke without getting bothered. So there I was, lighting up and taking in the calm sounds and sights all around, when out of nowhere, I picked up a noise coming from the trees behind me. I spun around and barely caught sight of something, just a blurry shape darting fast from one tree to another. For a second, my chest tightened, but I told myself I was just being jumpy, probably my brain playing tricks on me. Still, I kept my eyes locked on the last place I saw that movement. After a few seconds, I turned back toward the creek and tried to relax. Then it happened again. A weird, high-pitched screech rang out through the woods. I snapped around, and this time I saw it clearly. It was tall, skinny, moving between the trees with a strange spring in its step, and it made that awful whistling sound that didn't seem natural. I'd seen drawings of Bigfoot before, but this wasn't that. It didn't even come close. It was freakishly tall, like something out of a bad dream, real lanky, way taller than a person should be, and it had this jerky, almost puppet-like movement. Not exactly like those Slender Man stories, but more like a 25-foot tall marionette draped in something dark that flowed as it moved. It swayed like one of those inflatable things you see outside tire shops, except there was no wind, and nothing should have been making it move like that. My heart just about jumped out of my chest. That quiet moment I was enjoying, completely gone. I turned and ran, didn't stop to look back, just tore out of those woods as fast as I could move. I've never come across anything like that again. But if you ever find yourself deep in the backwoods of southern Kentucky, don't let your guard down. This is a story about something strange I experienced while out hunting in the Black Hills region of South Dakota. It took place around 4 years back during rifle season in late 2018. I was 22, just a couple months away from turning 23. For my birthday that year, my dad planned a hunting trip with me as a surprise. I was thrilled, mostly because he was usually swamped with work and I rarely got the chance to spend real time with him. This felt like one of those rare chances to actually connect. I spent the whole week before opening day making sure I had everything in order. I was counting down the days, looking forward to it. On the morning we were supposed to leave, I got a call from my mom. "Hey Han, I've got some bad news," she said. "Your dad's not feeling well. He won't be able to make it on the trip." I was pretty bummed, but I figured I'd still go. After all, I'd been planning this for days and didn't want all that effort to go to waste. I packed my rifle, jumped in my SUV, and headed to the spot we always used. It was still pitch black when I got there, so I leaned back in the seat and shut my eyes for a while. For people who don't hunt, it's important to arrive at your stand well before sunrise. If you walk in after it's light, you risk scaring away all the game. As I sat there, eyes closed, I started picking up on footsteps nearby, but something about them felt wrong. They were heavy, too heavy, and sounded like they came from someone walking on two legs. But they weren't normal footsteps. They didn't sound natural at all. I'd lived in the Black Hills nearly my whole life. I always felt comfortable out there. My family used to say I acted more like a tomboy, since I practically grew up out in the woods. So I knew those trails and trees like the back of my hand. But those footsteps weren't like anything I'd heard before. Then out of the darkness came my father's voice. "Honey, I decided to come after all. Where are you?" I froze. That was the last thing I expected. My dad loves jokes, but he's not the kind to yell through the woods. He'd usually sneak up and try to spook you or tug at your boot from under the blind. Plus, he knew the exact location of my tree stand. We'd been using the same one every season for years. It always had a good number of deer, but something about the voice gave me chills. It didn't sound quite right. It was almost lifeless, like someone reading his words from a script. I sat there, wide-eyed, not wanting to admit what I was thinking. I'd heard the stories, things in the woods that could copy voices, creatures people whispered about, things like mimics or shape-changers. My chest tightened, and I broke out in a cold sweat. If whatever this was found me, there'd be no way to get away fast enough. And even if I tried, I doubted my gun would help much. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited. That's when something stepped out from the trees. It looked human at first glance, but something was off. It was far too tall, and its arms swung way too low, so long they skimmed the ground. It walked slowly, its feet crunching loudly through the dry leaves scattered across the forest floor. Passed close to my stand, repeating the same line again and again. "Honey, I came out here to hunt with you. Can you tell me where you're at?" I stayed frozen in place, hardly even blinking. It took what felt like hours, but eventually, the thing moved on and disappeared into the dark. I didn't dare move until the first bit of daylight touched the trees. As soon as it did, I climbed down and made my way back toward my SUV. But every step I took, I felt like something was watching me. I kept hearing faint cracking sounds, branches, twigs, snapping behind me. I never turned around. By the time I got back to my vehicle, I felt like I'd been walking for days. I jumped in, started the engine, and sat there with shaking hands. I glanced in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw it. A pale, tall shape was standing behind one of the trees, just barely visible through the gaps in the brush. It wasn't moving. It was watching. Then it let out the most horrible sound I've ever heard. A scream that didn't sound human. My stomach dropped, and I slapped my hands over my ears on instinct. I hit the gas and yanked the wheel hard to the right, barely missing a thick tree trunk as I sped away. My heart was pounding the whole drive home. I couldn't think straight, couldn't even feel my fingers on the wheel. When I got back to the house, I sat in the driveway for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened. To this day, I still go out hunting in the same region. I still love the woods. And my dad? He really was sick that week. Just a bad cold. Nothing serious. We ended up going out together the following year without a hitch. I've never told anyone this before. My family always brushes off weird stuff like this. They laugh when I try to explain strange things. But writing this down now feels like letting go of a weight I've carried for too long. If there's one thing this showed me, it's that no matter how well you think you know a place, no matter how many times you've walked the same path, there are still things out there that can make you see it in a whole new way. Things that change how you feel about the woods you thought you understood. This story was told to me by someone I used to know. It's written from her side of things. She was out walking deep in the forested hills of southern Kentucky, just enjoying the quiet. If you catch my drift, she was also smoking a little weed. Back then, it wasn't exactly legal. This happened when I had just turned 19, during a stay at my Aunt Marlene's ranch for part of the summer break. Aunt Marlene owns a large 110-acre property where she looks after a wide variety of animals, from cats and chickens to even a young deer she had rescued after its mother had been struck by a vehicle. One late afternoon, I decided to go horseback riding with my cousin, Kyle. I rode my horse, Buck, named after a character from an old Western movie, while Kyle rode his mare, Clover. Kyle's Shepherd Husky mix, Bandit, trotted alongside us as we headed out. While riding along a tree-lined path, we stopped for a moment because both of us suddenly had the uneasy sense that someone, or something, was watching us. Kyle called out for Bandit, who jumped up onto his horse with him. Then we heard a sharp crack of a branch to our left. When we looked, a person wearing a clown mask was just standing there, staring. Kyle and I locked eyes, both frozen with fear. Before we had a chance to move, Bandit started growling in the opposite direction. We turned to our right and saw someone else, this time wearing a rubber monster mask, stepping out from behind a tree. Panic surged through us. Both people raised knives, real or fake. We weren't about to wait to find out. We spun our horses around and kicked them into a full run. Kyle held onto Clover's reins with one hand and kept Bandit steady with the other. I took one look back and saw those masked strangers sprinting after us. As we approached the edge of Aunt Marlene's land, something sharp flew by, barely missing Kyle. We could hear the hooves pounding the dirt as he shouted something like, "What is wrong with those people?" Just then, a loud gunshot rang through the trees. Ahead, we saw my aunt running out of the house holding her shotgun, with the neighbor, Mr. Dalton, and his teenage daughter, Sarah, racing up behind her with baseball bats in hand. The masked figures froze near the boundary fence as Kyle, Bandit, and the horses reached the yard. Aunt Marlene yelled at them to drop to the ground, and shockingly, they did. Kyle bolted inside to grab the phone and call the police. When law enforcement arrived, the two men were unmasked and claimed they were just messing around, playing a prank. The officers didn't buy it. They were charged with attempted assault and are now serving time behind bars. Looking back, if Bandit hadn't been there, we might not have noticed the second person. And without our horses, we probably wouldn't have gotten away. Sadly, Bandit passed away the following spring due to old age. It hit Kyle hard. Bandit had been his best buddy since he was a kid. Kyle's doing okay these days. He and his dad are still raising dogs, and they've got a fresh litter arriving any day now. But that terrifying experience is something neither of us will ever forget. It's burned into our memories for life. Before I tell you what happened, I want to share a little background. I've lived my whole life in the hills of Western New York, and I've spent a ton of time out in the woods hiking, fishing, and camping. I've been lucky enough to spot most of the wildlife that lives in this region, but I also believe there are things in the wild that people don't fully get, or even know exist. It was the end of summer in 2015. My ex-girlfriend, whose name I won't mention, grew up in a tough neighborhood in Trenton, New Jersey. She had never been camping before, so my family wanted to show her a bit of our outdoor lifestyle. We planned a weekend campout right in my folks' backyard. It wasn't exactly survival style or anything. We were staying in a pop-up trailer only about 60 feet from my parents' back door, but it was still a big change of pace for her. The weekend went smoothly. We did a bunch of stuff: fishing, long walks through the woods, swimming, and plenty of time around the fire making s'mores. It was just me, my family, her, and our two mixed-breed lab dogs, Rocky and Bella. We had already stayed 2 nights in the camper, and this was supposed to be our final night. My dad, who's a pretty practical guy, told us a storm was headed our way. We brushed it off and got ready to sleep, actually kind of excited to hear the rain tapping on the camper roof. We said goodnight and got comfortable, tucking the dogs in too. Just before falling asleep, my ex and I talked about how much fun the past couple days had been. We were both wiped out from all the swimming. I woke up sometime after midnight. It was hard to tell the exact time. The trailer was moving slightly, and I could hear thunder in the distance. I tried to get back to sleep, but then there was a huge crack of thunder that shook the whole camper. My ex and I sat up fast, and the dogs immediately started barking. The rain began pouring down heavily, like it was being dumped by buckets. Just as we started figuring out what was happening, we heard what sounded like barefoot footsteps running down the gravel path from the house to where we were. We figured it had to be one of my parents coming to get us, telling us to come inside because of the storm. "We're coming, Dad!" my ex yelled while the dog's growling picked up. Rocky, our 110-pound lab mix, was normally fearless, but she crawled under the small table next to Jack, who was already hiding there and usually more skittish. Out of nowhere, the camper door was hit by something with enough force to shake the entire structure. We screamed as the whole thing leaned like something was trying to yank it down. A loud bang followed, and we felt something land right on top of the camper. Outside, it was total darkness, which was strange because the yard light should have come on automatically, thanks to its sensor. The dogs were barking uncontrollably, and my ex started crying hard. I whispered to her that I'd let the dogs go first, then I'd come out after them, and she should run straight to the house and not stop for anything. She nodded through her tears. I flung open the camper door and yelled, "Go, Rocky! Go, Bella!" They bolted out without hesitation. I followed right behind them, empty-handed at first, but then spotted the hatchet my dad used for cutting firewood, sitting just a few steps away. I snatched it and ran through the rain after her, who was already screaming as she ran. That's when the motion lights finally turned on, lighting up the yard just enough through the downpour. I looked around, adrenaline flooding my chest, and saw nothing. No person, no creature, nothing at all. All I could hear was the wind and the storm. I looked toward the house and saw my dad, still in his sleep clothes, being helped up the back steps by my mom. Whatever had banged into the camper and climbed on top of it had vanished. The area where the camper was parked was surrounded by a bunch of trees, but none of them had low branches. If something had jumped down, we would have heard it or seen it land. But we didn't. I went inside and explained to my parents what had just happened. My dad, who's never been into ghost stories or anything like that, shrugged and said I was probably just freaked out by a large raccoon or maybe a bear. He says that kind of thing a lot when I tell him stories like this. Still, he agreed to take a look in the morning. The dogs were the only ones who got any rest that night. As soon as the sky lightened up, we all headed outside. I told my dad everything again and showed him that when I jumped up and down on the camper, it didn't even budge. It was too solid to be moved by wind. Then came the worst part. My dad grabbed the ladder to check the roof, and there he found for long, clear marks that looked like finger streaks cutting through the algae up top. "Must have been raccoon prints," he said with a sigh. But I pointed out that the finger marks were nearly 7 inches long. He just mumbled something and went back inside. At that moment, I knew for sure it wasn't a raccoon and definitely not the wind. I can't explain what came to our camper that night, but I'm seriously thankful that whatever it was didn't stick around. Because of the fun extra activities offered, he chose to join a youth program that focused on outdoor skills. Every week, they had to complete nature-based tasks to earn patches and move up in the program. One morning, the group was assigned a trail walk through a small wooded area. Along the path, they had to take pictures at marked spots to prove they followed the route correctly. The kids were split into groups of 3. Boys went in trios and so did the girls. My step-uncle's son ended up in one of the first boy groups. Behind them was a trio of girls, and behind them another boy group, and so on. They were spaced out by roughly 50 yards. While they were walking, he noticed someone wearing bright red workout pants standing quietly near the far edge of the woods. The man seemed to be watching them. At first, it didn't seem strange. It wasn't unusual to see runners or walkers out early in the woods, so he thought the man was just looking out of curiosity. When they finished their first round, the group leader was impressed with how quickly they completed the route. He told them they could earn extra patches if they repeated the route 2 more times. The kids agreed and set off again in the same order and spacing as before. As they neared the same stretch of woods again, my step-uncle's son noticed that the man in the red athletic pants was still standing in the same exact spot, just staring without saying a word. This time, the other 2 boys in his group saw him too. They talked briefly about whether to take a picture and report it to the leader, but since it was a public area and runners often passed through, they figured it wasn't worth worrying about. They kept walking. On the 3rd and final round, when they were coming up on the same part of the path, they lowered their heads to avoid making eye contact with the silent man in red. When they got within about 30 yards of that point, a loud scream echoed behind them. They turned and saw one of the girls from the group behind them sprinting toward them, crying and shouting. Sensing something was wrong, the boys immediately took off running toward their school building. When they got there, they told the leader what had happened. He quickly gathered the rest of the group. One of the girls, shaken and pale, explained that as her group reached the edge of the woods, a man suddenly stepped out in front of them and exposed himself. His pants were pulled down to his knees, and he had a creepy, wide grin on his face. The girls had screamed and bolted. Some of the other groups, hearing the screams, had run to the spot but found no one there. Not seeing anyone, and realizing it could be unsafe to search alone, they returned to the school to stick together. The leader called local law enforcement, who arrived and searched the area. They couldn't locate the man. After interviewing the children, the officers believed the man had been watching the kids from the beginning, waiting for the right time and the most vulnerable group. They thought he had kept track of how the children were spaced out and waited until one of the girl groups was far enough from others to approach them and flee before anyone could intervene. The outdoor event had been scheduled to end that afternoon, but everyone was kept at school well into the evening as police spoke with the kids and staff, gave safety instructions, and put out a warning for the suspect. My step-uncle's son stayed in the program until he left for college several years later. As far as he knows, the man in red was never caught, and no similar incidents happened in the area again. Still, because of that day, the school put new rules in place. From then on, all outdoor group activities had to include at least 3 adults, and many parents stepped in to help supervise. Some even offered to help cover costs to hire extra safety personnel for bigger events. That kind of friendship where you can just pick up like nothing ever changed, even after a long time apart. That's what it was like with Lila. We hadn't really kept in touch since college. Aside from a few comments and likes on social media, life had moved on. But when she mentioned a weekend trip to the Smoky Mountains, it felt like no time had passed. It was as though we were back in the old days, going hiking, swimming, paddle boarding, and talking for hours about life. This trip felt like a nostalgic rewind. Lila and I met back in college, where we were both majoring in ecology. We ended up in many of the same courses and quickly became close. We realized we both liked the same bands, had similar weekend routines, and even ended up sharing a dorm for a while. We used to spend our weekends exploring nearby creeks or heading out for little adventures. Since our school was close to the Smoky Mountain region, day trips like this were pretty normal for us. The ride to the river was calm and quiet. The sun was just starting to rise, spilling soft golden light through the mist that hovered over the slopes. Everything was lush, too green almost, like the forest was pulsing with life. We came across the perfect riverside area with open space to stretch out and water so still it looked like glass. Lila had already popped open a bottle of citrus cider as I started unloading the boards from the trunk. We were laughing, joking about dumb things from our college days, and falling back into the rhythm we used to have. The whole morning felt like a dream. We swam through the crisp water, lounged by the bank, and drifted under the sun on our boards. It was all so familiar and easy. A small group of birds wheeled lazily above us, their wings catching the light. But even with all that, something about the place started to make me uneasy. I didn't tell Lila, but there was a weird feeling I couldn't shake. After lunch, we decided to go farther down the river and see what we could find. The current was light, just enough to guide us along without much effort. As we made our way deeper into the woods, the banks grew tighter and the trees arched overhead, creating a leafy tunnel. It was beautiful in a strange, quiet way, with the light dancing across the ripples in the water. About 3/4 of a mile down, we came across a narrow bay tucked behind a curve. The water there was low enough to beach the boards easily. The shore, though, was rougher, tangled with vines and prickly plants that caught on our pants as we stepped ashore. "Let's check out that trail," Lila said, pointing at a skinny dirt path that twisted into the forest. "Maybe it leads somewhere cool." "Sure, unless we get eaten alive by bugs," I teased. We both laughed and set off. She cracked open another drink and took the lead. First, the trail was pretty. The ground was packed and dry, framed by tall trees. But the farther we went, the darker it got. The trees thickened until they nearly blocked the sky, and the air turned heavier, like the forest was closing in. The usual nature sounds vanished too. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of our steps and the snap of sticks underfoot. "Do you hear how quiet it is?" Lila asked, lowering her voice like she didn't want to disturb anything. "Maybe it's just the time of day," I said. "Or maybe we're scaring everything off," she mumbled. We pressed on, pushing through scratchy brush and stepping over roots that crossed the path like ropes. Eventually, we reached a split where two narrow trails led down to a wide bed of rocks. A shallow stream passed through, gliding over smooth stones. Moss clung to the sides, bright and soft-looking. It was picture perfect. "This is beautiful," Lila said, dropping her bag and pulling out her phone. "I'm gonna pee real quick. Be right back." "Don't wander too far," I chuckled, watching her disappear into the trees. I settled by the edge of the stream, letting the bubbling water relax me. It was the kind of place you could sit for hours, just trees, water, and the quiet. But then, a scream cut through the calm. My heart jumped. "Lila!" I shouted, standing up fast. More screams followed, high and panicked. I ran, pushing through low limbs and snapping branches as I followed her voice. When I found her, she was struggling to pull her pants up, her face pale with fear. "What happened?" I asked. "Someone's watching us," she said, pointing past me into the trees. I turned slowly, my stomach sinking. At first, I didn't see anything, just shadows between trunks. Then movement. Something crouched, tall despite the hunch. His shape wasn't right. His arms hung long, his back twisted like he'd been folded the wrong way. His face was streaked with mud. His skin looked melted in spots, like it had been burned or warped. Then he waved, a slow, stiff wave like he was mocking us. "Run," I said, grabbing her arm. We tore down the trail, branches scraping our faces and arms. The woods echoed with strange whooping sounds, almost like laughter, bouncing around us. We hit a slope and Lila fell hard. "I think I twisted my ankle," she cried out. I knelt beside her. "Can you move?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes. I wrapped her ankle with a cloth from my bag as quickly as I could. Then she made a choking sound. "What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked behind me. I turned and saw him again, no more than 20 feet away. That smile was wide now, showing too many teeth. He started to laugh, a high-pitched sound that bounced between the trees. He waved again, then bolted into the woods with a screech that pierced the air. I yanked Lila up. "We're leaving now." She leaned on me as we limped back toward the river, but the sounds followed. Cracking twigs, leaves brushing, low, whispery giggles. It was like the woods were pushing us, leading us somewhere we didn't want to go. I felt hands in my hair, pulling at my shirt. I turned more than once, but nothing was there, just that same suffocating forest. We broke through the trees, gasping for air. The river was in sight. Our boards were still where we left them. Thank God. We threw our gear together and pushed into the water, paddling upstream with everything we had. I kept glancing at the shore. Lila was barely able to move her paddle, and he was still there, dancing along the bank. His movements were jerky, like a puppet being yanked. Sometimes he vanished into the trees, only to show up again farther ahead, always matching our pace. "Faster," I said, even though I knew she was barely holding on. The current had picked up and every stroke was harder than the last. I didn't know how long we could keep going. Just when I thought I'd pass out, the woods grew quiet and the trailhead to the parking lot appeared. We pulled ashore, grabbed our things, and ran. We didn't stop until we slammed the car doors and locked them. We sat in silence, panting, hearts still racing. After a moment, Lila gave a shaky laugh. "What just happened?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, still catching my breath, "but I'm never coming back." We didn't talk much on the drive home. We tried to laugh, eat some snacks, act normal. But under it all, we both knew that what happened out there wasn't just our imaginations. Weeks passed. Life returned to its usual rhythm. But every night, when I closed my eyes, I'd see that crooked smile, hear that awful laugh. Lila and I avoided talking about it, like ignoring it would make it go away. But the silence between us felt heavier than before, like something unsaid was sitting in the room with us. Then one wet afternoon, my phone rang. It was Lila. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. "It's about what we saw." An hour later, we met at a small diner in town. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the sky was still dark. We took a booth in the back, far from other people. Lila looked worn out, pale and nervous. Her eyes kept darting to the door, like she was expecting someone to follow her in. "I keep dreaming about him," she whispered, stirring her drink with a shaky hand. "My home sits in a place most people don't know about, full of steep ridges, sharp cliffs, and deep hollows that stretch far off into the distance. This place hides a deep past that not many have heard about. What you're about to read takes you into one of those hidden stories. Inside this distant land is a thick, wooded mountain the locals call Raven Ridge Bluff. People around here know of it, but the older folks often call it something different. Asterisk asterisk, the woods that take asterisk asterisk. It's a place full of strange stories, older than most of the towns nearby. These hills and crags stretch out for miles, holding onto memories long forgotten. Many years ago, groups of settlers made their way deep into parts of the land that hadn't been mapped. Their eyes were set on what is now known as Raven Ridge Bluff. After some exploration, they found a land rich in animals, water, and healthy soil, perfect for growing crops and raising families. To them, Raven Ridge wasn't just a patch of wilderness. It was hope, a fresh beginning for their people. Back then, the native people living nearby lived mostly in peace with the newcomers. But when it became clear that the settlers planned to stay and build on Raven Ridge Bluff, the peace began to crack. The local tribes had deep beliefs about the land. They said something bad lived in those woods and warned the settlers to leave it alone. These were not casual warnings. They came from old fears and stories passed down for generations. The settlers didn't listen. They were too focused on the opportunity the land gave them. Despite small clashes with the native groups, who tried to stop what they saw as a grave mistake, the settlers went ahead with their plans. They built homes and even started a small town. But that town wouldn't last. As time passed, more and more stories came out about the bad luck that seemed to curse the place. Strange sounds, missing people, and shadows where none should be. No one could prove any of it, but everyone knew the stories. Eventually, the wild began to reclaim the area, and the town was left behind. Today, people are still told not to enter the woods near Raven Ridge Bluff. But some folks don't listen. Those who hunt in these parts have their own quiet rule. Asterisk asterisk, never go alone, asterisk asterisk. Always go with someone. That's the way it's been for as long as I can remember. In July of 2002, I broke that rule. They say the Amazon is the world's green jungle, but many would argue that the Appalachians in full summer are just as wild. Thick woods, rolling hills, and the kind of heat that makes the air feel heavy. I'd hunted around Raven Ridge many times, but that summer was the first time I went out by myself. I was supposed to go with 3 other hunters, but plans changed at the last second. Against my better thinking, I packed up my truck and drove to the edge of the forest alone. I parked at the end of an old gravel path and headed in on foot. As soon as I stepped under the trees, something felt wrong. The forest, which is usually full of birds, bugs, and wind, was still. Too still. I kept walking, aiming for a hunting spot I'd used plenty of times before. First, everything seemed okay. I could hear birds, squirrels, even the buzz of insects. But after about an hour, that all faded. It was like something had clicked off. Even though I knew where I was, I started feeling out of place, like I was being watched. About a half hour from my old hunting spot, I stopped for a break. I sat down on a flat rock and poured myself some coffee. When I looked down, I saw tiny drops of blood on a leaf near my foot. It didn't take long to figure out where it came from. I'd cut my arm somewhere along the way. As I stared at the blood, a strange thing happened. A group of butterflies came down and landed on the leaf. They hovered over the drops and started touching them with their mouths. The sight was so strange I barely noticed the crack of a branch behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, the butterflies were gone. So was the blood. I felt uneasy, but told myself not to worry. I kept going until I reached the clearing where I'd put up a deer stand years ago. A small stream ran through it, cutting across the clearing from the side of the mountain. It was quiet and peaceful, just the right place to spot a deer. Sure enough, within an hour, a big buck stepped into the clearing. I raised my rifle, looking through the scope. Just as I lined up the shot, the buck snapped its head toward the trees, then bolted. Something had scared it. I quickly swung the scope toward the movement. At first, I couldn't make out what it was, but when it came into focus, my whole body went cold. Standing in the trees was a figure that looked just like me. Only, it was wrong. It was naked, filthy with dirt, and smiling in a twisted, rotting way. I lowered my rifle in shock, blinking to make sure I wasn't seeing things. But when I looked again, it was gone. The air suddenly felt thick. The forest, once full of life, now felt dead. I didn't know what I had seen, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was nearby. I walked slowly down to where the figure had been standing. The closer I got, the more I felt like something was staring right through me. Then I heard it, a deep, growling noise. Something wild and angry came from behind the trees. I didn't think, I just ran. The woods I had walked for years now felt like a trap. Trees seemed to press in from all sides. I pushed through them, sprinting the whole way back to the truck. A hike that should have taken 2 hours took me maybe 1. I stumbled out onto the road, gasping for air, heart pounding like a drum. As I leaned against the side of the truck, trying to catch my breath, I saw something move near a tree about 30 feet away. I looked again. A large, black shape pulled back behind the tree. Then, a hand reached out. It was shaped like a person's hand, but the fingers were too long. The skin looked twisted and gray. It vanished in a blink. I didn't wait to see more. I jumped in the truck and drove away, not looking back once. What happened that day is still something I can't explain. I've spent years trying to figure it out, but all I can say is this: there are places out there that haven't forgotten. Places older than stories. Places where something still lingers. If you find yourself near one, be careful. Don't walk in without knowing what came before, because some places still remember, and some things don't stay buried. I've spent many summers and fall seasons deep in the wilderness areas of Idaho and northern Colorado, doing everything from fishing to hiking and living simply off the land. One particular summer, something happened that really shook me. I never talked much about it. I did tell the local sheriff's department, but that was all. It took place during one of my usual solo trips, far out in a secluded area of northern Colorado. There was this lake I'd heard a few things about, quiet stories mostly from folks who had been off the beaten path. Naturally, I wanted to check it out for myself. Reaching the lake meant a brutal trek, about 10 miles through steep, rocky slopes that left my legs aching halfway there. The rocks were sharp enough to tear open skin if you slipped, so I had to go slow and steady. But once I made it to the lake, tucked tightly between 2 towering ridgelines, every bit of that effort felt worth it. The water was still and glassy, reflecting the sun in perfect ripples. It was untouched, almost surreal, like something from another time. This was the kind of place I always hoped to find, quiet, remote, and free of people. I stood there a long while, just soaking it all in. The tall trees, the clean scent of the air and pine, and the total silence, broken now and then by a distant bird call. Not a soul around, just me and the wild. I'd heard from a couple of seasoned anglers that this lake had a rare kind of trout, not landlocked salmon, but still big and hard-fighting. Some said they were the length of a grown man's arm. I didn't know if it was true, but that was part of the draw. I wanted to see for myself. I dropped my pack, put together my rod, and started casting. I didn't even set up camp first, I was too eager. And it paid off. I kept pulling in trout after trout, each one between 2 and 3 pounds, each one putting up a solid fight. By noon, I had 6 lined up on a stringer, enough for a couple of good meals. Those stories hadn't been wrong, and dinner was definitely taken care of. I put the fish in a shallow spot in the water to keep them cold and sat back against a large rock under some shade. The breeze coming off the lake was cool, and the sun warmed the stone. It was dead silent, peaceful, like I was the only one left alive on the planet. I kicked back, ate a quick lunch, and let myself relax. That's when I noticed them. 2 figures moving far away between the trees. I couldn't make out details from that distance, just vague shapes. I assumed they were other campers or hikers, maybe out hunting. In the backcountry, people generally keep to themselves, so I didn't pay much attention and closed my eyes. I dozed off without meaning to. When I opened them again, the sun had dropped low, stretching long shadows across the clearing. I swore under my breath for letting that much time go. I still needed to get camp set up before dark. I got to work quickly, pitched the tent, set up my cooking area, and rigged a line between 2 trees to hang food and garbage, keeping it out of reach from bears. But while I worked, I had this lingering feeling that something was off. I told myself it was just leftover nerves from seeing those 2 people earlier. Still, I kept glancing over my shoulder. By the time I wrapped everything up, it was almost dark, and the air had turned chilly. I grabbed my fish, cleaned them up, and prepped them with butter, garlic powder, and a few dried herbs I always carry. Wrapped them in foil and dropped them into the coals. The smell was incredible. As I sat down to eat, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a faint light flickering down the shoreline. Another campfire. I could see movement near it, shadows shifting. Probably the same 2 people I'd seen earlier, settling in like I was. Then I heard it yelling, faint at first, muffled by distance, but definitely angry. A fight. I couldn't hear the words, only the sharp, rising tone. I figured it was just an argument, but it escalated fast. The yelling turned panicked, frantic. Then came a scream, high-pitched, piercing, and horrible. It echoed around the cliffs and hung in the air way too long. It didn't sound like a normal scream. It sounded like someone in sheer terror. My whole body locked up. I stared into the darkness where the fire flickered, telling myself it was none of my business. But I couldn't shake it. Then the scream stopped, replaced by silence. A silence so heavy it felt unnatural. That's when I heard movement. Footsteps, crunching twigs and loose stones, getting louder. Someone or something was coming fast through the woods. Whoever it was wasn't being quiet either. They were crashing through branches and kicking up gravel. I figured if they kept that pace on terrain like this, they'd be cut up pretty bad. And then I saw her. A woman came stumbling out from the tree-line. Her eyes were wide, wild. Her clothes were torn, bloody in places, hanging off her like they'd been shredded. She looked like she'd crawled through a war zone. "Please," she rasped, her voice nearly gone from screaming. "They're coming." There was blood on her arms and legs, dried and fresh. Her face was scratched up. She collapsed right in front of me, barely able to hold herself up. I didn't even think. I pulled her up by the arm and pushed her toward the tent. "Get in," I whispered. "Stay low." She crawled in fast, shaking all over. I zipped the flap and sat back by the fire, trying to look casual even though my chest was pounding. Minutes later, I saw them. 2 men stepping into the outer edge of the firelight. They looked around, scanning my camp. Their faces were hard, their eyes colder than the mountain air. "Evening," one of them said, voice smooth in a way that put me on edge. "Seen a woman pass through here?" I shook my head. "Nope," I said. "Heard some yelling down that way though. Coyotes maybe." They looked at each other, clearly not buying it. One stepped closer, locking eyes with me. His face was like stone, sun-darkened, rugged, mean. "You sure about that?" he asked. "We're missing someone. She might be hurt." I forced a calm look and shrugged. "Just me here. Been fishing since morning." They didn't say anything, just stood there, watching, listening. I took another bite of fish and chewed slowly, pretending not to care. Eventually, the taller one gave a grunt and nodded. "All right, keep an eye out. Let us know if you see anything." I nodded again, making sure my voice didn't waver. "Sure." They turned away and walked off, but I could feel their eyes on me long after they vanished into the woods. I didn't move. I just sat and stared into the fire, straining to hear anything. A branch snapping, a footstep, nothing. When it felt safe enough, I unzipped the tent. She was inside, curled up and shaking. Her eyes were huge and full of fear. "They're gone for now," I whispered, "but I need to know what's going on." She hesitated, then finally spoke, tears in her eyes. "It got messed up," she said. "I went camping with some people I thought were friends, but things turned bad, real bad. I waited. They started fighting over me," she said, voice barely steady. "Jealous, possessive. They got drunk. One of them, Kyle, he was the worst. He said if he couldn't have me, nobody could. I tried to leave. He snapped, got violent. So I ran. That hit hard. We were a long way from help. No cell service. Just what I had in my backpack. We can't stay here," I said. "It's 10 miles to the trailhead, but we have to move." Just then, something rustled beyond the trees. We froze. Not an animal. Not the wind. It was footsteps again, deliberate, steady, closing in. I told her to stay put, not make a sound. I stepped out, heart hammering. The fire had burned low, just coals now. I saw them again, those two men, closing in one slow step at a time. "Thought we'd drop by again," the taller one said. "Got the feeling you weren't being straight with us. Maybe we talk a bit." He stepped closer. His friend moved sideways, trying to flank me. I tried to stay calm. "Just fishing," I said. "Not looking for trouble." My eyes scanned the area. My pack was nearby. My knife, was it inside or in the outer pouch? Could I grab a branch? Throw something? "Funny thing," the tall one said. "We didn't ask what you were looking for." They kept closing in. My legs tensed, ready to move, to fight, to run. And then, from across the lake, a sharp, loud whistle cut through the night. It echoed off the cliffs, clear and unexpected, and everything changed. My wife encouraged me to share this story with you. She's a regular listener of your show and felt others should hear what a real terrifying moment felt like for me. I was around 13 years old at the time. We lived in a small community just outside of Johnson City, Tennessee, right in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. This was in the mid to late 1970s. Things were different back then. Parents didn't hover like they do today. We'd leave the house early in the morning and might not come back until the sun was setting. Folks didn't stress about kids running around outside. Looking back, maybe they should have. We were always venturing out into the woods, discovering old shafts and natural caves, and sleeping out under the stars when the nights were warm enough. We weren't stuck to screens like kids these days. There were barely any shows to watch anyway, so being inside just didn't appeal to us. Thinking about it now, we pulled some pretty risky stunts that could have gotten us seriously hurt, but somehow we made it through mostly okay. This particular story began on a frosty morning in early November. My brothers and I were standing by the roadside, waiting on the school bus. It was close to 7 a.m., probably in 1976 or so. Out of nowhere, we noticed the gravel shifting. We heard pebbles bouncing and watched as dust and loose soil shot up from a ridge across from us. It all happened so fast, maybe 10 seconds, but it was enough to freak us out. We sprinted back to the house. Later, we heard on the radio in my dad's old truck that a powerful earthquake, around 7.2 on the scale, had hit a nearby county up north. My dad said people felt it all the way down in Montgomery, Alabama, almost 120 miles away. School was canceled that day, which we thought was awesome. So we did what we always did, took off into the woods. We made our way up to that ridge where we'd seen the rocks shifting. On the way, we came across an odd hole in the ground. It wasn't just a dip, it looked like a real cave opening. Not the kind you see in movies or the kind made for visitors, but the kind that's half hidden by tangled roots, fallen leaves, and dirt. Still, you could peer inside. We rushed back home, grabbed some rope and one of my dad's old oil lanterns, and headed back out. There were 4 of us in total. My best friend Larry, a set of twin brothers named Wes and Will, and me. Larry and I were always together. Wherever I went, he followed, and vice versa. The twins were troublemakers, foul mouths, constantly daring each other, but they made things more fun. We climbed down to the cave entrance, clearing away the brush with the lantern. As soon as I stuck my face near the opening, I was nearly knocked over by the smell of rotting flesh. It was awful. I yanked my shirt over my nose and crawled through the tight space. Larry passed me the lantern, and I saw that the cave was low, maybe about 4 feet tall. There was room to crawl, but not to stand. It stretched out in both directions, but my light only reached so far. One of the twins slid in behind me, then Larry holding the lantern over his head. We crawled deeper, and soon we saw bones all around. Animal bones scattered across the dirt. Some were bare. Others had bits of meat still clinging to them. Then one of the twins picked up a dog collar lying next to a small pile. That's when it hit us. These weren't just deer or raccoons. These were dogs, cats, maybe even goats. The bones were from all kinds of creatures, domesticated and wild. I remember standing there and wondering what could have done something like that. Then I noticed it, 2 bright reflections far off at the back of the cave. They didn't move or make a noise, but I knew instantly they were eyes. Couldn't look away. I whispered that we had to get out now. Larry must have heard the fear in my voice. He turned, saw the eyes, and didn't hesitate. We all turned and scrambled as fast as we could back toward the entrance. I knew without a doubt we'd stumbled into some kind of predator's den, most likely a bear's. When we got outside, we raced back home, out of breath, telling my dad everything. He was just about to leave for his shift at the paper mill. He warned us not to go near that cave again until he had a look. My mom overheard and made it clear we'd be in serious trouble if we went back. We didn't want to mess with a bear, so we stayed clear. Dad gave us some yard chores to keep us out of trouble, and that was that, for a while. The rest of the week passed quietly, though the quake was all anyone at school or church talked about. By Saturday, though, Larry and I couldn't stop thinking about that cave. We decided we had to go back. It wasn't smart, but we talked ourselves into it. We'd bring our pocket knives and some big sticks, just in case that bear was still around. We made our way back out to the ridge. Rain earlier in the week had washed out more of the entrance. It was wider now, easier to get into. We climbed in again, fighting the stink, and pushed deeper than before. At the back, the cave started sloping down like a set of rough stone stairs. We followed it carefully until we found a drop-off, just a hole in the floor that went straight down. We couldn't see the bottom, but we could feel warm air rising from it. We didn't have enough rope to go down safely, so we climbed back out. But we weren't done. We gathered dry wood, started a fire, and made crude torches. Larry was always good at starting fires. Once the torches were ready, we went back in and approached the hole again. We lit one and dropped it down. It hit something below, about 20 feet down. Then we heard it. This growl, low and threatening, like nothing I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a wolf. Maybe a big cat? It didn't sound quite like that either. Then it screamed. It wasn't just loud. It was so intense, it knocked the wind out of me. My head felt like it was splitting open. I dropped to my knees. Larry did too, holding both ears like he was in agony. The lantern slipped from his hand, bounced off the rocks, and fell into the pit. For a second, everything went black. Then, suddenly, the bottom of the hole lit up again when the lantern shattered and caught something down there. That's when we saw it. It was pacing around the torch like it was sizing us up. Not a bear, not a mountain lion either. It was long, dark, darker than night, with tall pointed ears like a Doberman's, almost like horns. Its eyes glowed this deep, burning red. It locked eyes with us like it was deciding which of us to attack first. It let out another cry, louder than before. Felt like being crushed by a massive weight. We couldn't breathe, couldn't think. We left everything behind and scrambled for the exit. As we climbed, it screamed again. This time it felt like a giant had kicked us in the chest. We collapsed forward, covering our ears, desperate to get away. We finally stumbled out into the open and ran, not even looking back. I don't remember much else about that run, just the raw fear and the pain in my head. We couldn't hear right for days afterward. My parents took me to the doctor, who said we had no serious injuries, just cuts, bruises, and some mild ear damage. He said we were lucky, especially considering how dangerous cave gases can be. My hearing slowly returned, but the nightmares stuck around for a long time. I'd wake up cold and sweaty, thinking I was still down there. Larry and I never returned to that cave. We didn't talk about it either. Not really. Not like we used to. Not long after my family moved upstate. I lost touch with Larry. Years later, I heard about another quake in the area and decided to go back. The cave was still there, though part of the roof had caved in. I asked around for Larry, but no one knew where he'd gone. The twins were still around, working at a tire shop. They said Larry stuck around for years, but was never the same after that day. He'd gone to a school for kids with hearing problems, and when he came back, he was different. Quiet, shut down, like part of him stayed in that cave. I don't know what we saw. I just know it wasn't any animal I've read about. Whatever it was, it could paralyze with sound. Could scare you so bad your body just shuts off. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. This happened back in 2016, right around the time I was about to turn 19. I'm 26 now. To be clear, I've never told anyone close to me about this. There are two reasons for that. First, they'd probably think I lost my mind. Second, they might assume I made the whole thing up. I've always been known as someone who tells the truth. Making up wild stories has never been my thing. Just for context, I'm not religious. I guess you could say I lean more toward agnostic. I don't really buy into ghost stuff or anything paranormal, but I don't totally shut it down either. I'm aware that I don't know everything, so I keep an open mind, but I stay skeptical. Stories about UFOs or haunted houses. I usually think there's a simpler, more down-to-earth explanation. Not as exciting, maybe, but more believable. This experience, though, I can't explain. And that's coming from someone who tends to keep things pretty straightforward. A little background first. My mom and my younger brother were heading to visit my grandparents. They live in a tiny place called Hollow Bend, about a half-hour drive south of where we were staying. It's tucked deep into the hills. Not totally off the grid, but not exactly close to much either. The closest neighbors are spread out miles apart. The area had that small-town, backwoods feel to it, and the people there fit that image too. Plenty of colorful personalities, the kind you find in remote parts of the Missouri Ozarks. You get the idea. People missing teeth, some shady stuff going on, and more than a few folks who'd make you lock your car doors. We stayed in a small trailer about 250 feet from my grandparents' place. One evening, just before sunset, I decided to take the ATV out into the woods. It was one of the few things I actually looked forward to on those trips since there wasn't much else around to do. I filled the gas tank all the way up and asked my grandparents where the path through the woods started. I drove off, going in a straight line for about 45 minutes. By then, I noticed the gas was getting low, so I began looking for a spot to turn around. I found a small opening in the trees and slowed down. That's when things started getting strange. I remember hearing all the normal forest sounds. The breeze moving through the leaves, birds chirping, the occasional tapping of a woodpecker. It was calm. I liked it. Then all at once, everything went still. Every sound just vanished. The quiet was so complete, it felt unnatural. No wind, no birds, nothing. It felt like I'd been dropped into a soundless bubble. Even the hum of the four-wheeler seemed like it had been turned down, like I was hearing it from underwater or from far away. It was the most unreal moment I've ever had. I kept going a bit farther, and that's when I saw something up ahead in the trail. It looked like a massive buck or something similar, but it wasn't right. It was standing dead center in the path, maybe 60 feet ahead, though I couldn't really tell. My depth perception was completely off at that point. This thing looked like it was flickering in and out of focus, almost as if it wasn't fully there. It just stood there, not moving, facing me. The eyes were pitch black, like staring into holes in space. The rest of the forest was full of warm color, but those eyes were like cold glass. I still see them in my head when I try to sleep. I've had nightmares about them. Its antlers were way too big, bigger than anything I've ever seen, and they weren't shaped right either. They looked like tree roots, gnarled and twisted in every direction. They weren't branching in the usual way deer antlers do. I was frozen. I let go of the gas and just sat there staring. My chest was tight. Then, just as suddenly as the silence had come, the wind picked up again. The leaves began moving. The trees started to sway, but instead of comforting me, it felt intentional. Almost like the trees were trying to warn me. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't a thought. It was a feeling, like something was telling me to leave. Not with words, just this deep, unsettling push, like I was being told I shouldn't be there. I turned the ATV around the best I could. It was a tight trail, and I nearly flipped the thing down the side of a steep drop while trying to make the turn. But I didn't care. I had to get out of there. I gunned the throttle and sped back the way I'd come. Still no noise from the forest. I've been inside my dad's recording studio before. It's completely soundproofed, so I know what absolute silence sounds like. This wasn't that. This was worse. This was like sound didn't exist at all. As I rode, I kept glancing behind me. I don't know why, but I couldn't help it. And after a while, I saw it again. That same creature. It wasn't standing still this time. It was following me. First, it looked like a normal deer again. Still huge, but moving slowly. Watching. Following. Everything about it felt wrong. I tried to focus on the path, just wanting to get back to where I'd started. But something was off. I passed a tree covered in thick green moss. One I didn't remember seeing on the way out. It stood out, towering above everything else around it. I was sure it hadn't been there before. Everything in that stretch of the woods suddenly looked unfamiliar. Even the ground looked different. I checked behind me. My tire tracks were gone. Gone like someone had wiped them clean. That's when panic really kicked in. But I kept moving forward. I kept telling myself I hadn't taken any turns. The trail had no splits, no forks. There was only one way in and one way out. Still, the forest felt twisted, like something had shifted, like the woods weren't the same woods anymore. Eventually, things started to look familiar again. The trail looked like it had before. My tire marks were suddenly back in the dirt. It was as if whatever strange patch I'd gone through had just stopped existing. The breeze picked up again, but this time it didn't feel threatening. If anything, it felt calm, like it was helping me along. I came to the split in the path that led back toward the highway. I made the turn, and as I reached the shoulder of the road, everything went quiet again. I looked back. The creature was there again, standing at the edge of the trees. This time, it was moving, stomping its hooves like it was shaking something off. The leaves rustled again, and I got that same heavy feeling, like a warning. It wasn't anger, just a cold, firm message. Don't come back. Then it turned and stepped back into the forest. All the usual forest sounds returned. Birds, wind, insects, everything. I was trembling so badly I could hardly grip the throttle. But I rode hard and fast back toward my grandparents' place. On the way, I passed a man riding another ATV. He gave me a wave and I waved back. Something about him made me uneasy, like he already knew what I'd seen, like he'd seen it too, or maybe he was somehow part of it. I didn't stick around to find out. I got back to the trailer and kept it all to myself. To this day, that memory hasn't faded. Most folks would probably say I imagined the whole thing or made it up. I wish that were the case. I wish I could chalk it up to a dream or heat stroke. But I know what I experienced. I know what I saw. I don't think it wanted to hurt me. I never felt like I was in danger, exactly. It was more like I wasn't supposed to be there, like something was keeping me out, almost like it was guiding me out. Not gently, but not violently either. Like a protector, but in a way I'll never understand. Sometimes I still dream about that deer. I'll be in a completely different place and it'll show up, always in the background, always watching, and I always wake up just before it comes too close. I don't know what it was. I'm not gonna pretend I do, but that was my experience. Buried deep in the backwoods of the Smoky Hills in western North Carolina. Me, my friend Anna, and two others, Josh and Caleb, had heard about the great fishing and snowmobile trails around Lake Pinemore. We thought it would be a nice way to get a taste of the wild before going back to our usual lives. None of us had any idea what we were about to face. The cabin was tucked up against a stretch of woods that felt heavier and darker than any of us expected. We got there just before nightfall, the sky already dull gray and the cold settling in fast. The cabin was one of those old wooden cabins with a small wood stove in the corner and 2 bedrooms. Pretty cozy, I guess. But something about the way the wind sliced through the tall pines made it feel eerie. It wasn't a warm welcome. The first strange thing happened the next morning. Caleb woke me early, right at sunrise, and said, "Come check this out." I followed him outside. Fresh snow covered the ground, but it was marked with footprints. Not the usual round prints you'd expect from bears or moose. These looked like human feet but stretched too long and narrow. You could even see individual toe marks. The tracks started at the edge of the forest, circled the cabin twice, then disappeared back into the woods. Whatever made them had a huge step. Anna joked that maybe we had a giant living nearby. Josh, the skeptic of the group, just shrugged and said he'd seen stranger tracks while hunting up north in Vermont. Still, I wasn't so sure. I thought we'd be alone out here, but it looked like we weren't. Later that day, we found a half-frozen animal hide near those same tracks. Nothing unusual, lots of predators around, right? But the marks on the fur didn't look right. It seemed like something had scraped the hair off in long strips. Josh said it looked like a tool was used rather than an animal's teeth. That's when he started asking around the closest town if there had been any problems with wolves or bears recently. One old man working at the gas station gave him a grim look and muttered something about the Wendigo. None of us took it seriously, just local legends to scare visitors and kids. We were tourists, but we weren't fools. Over the next few nights, the wind blew hard around the cabin. Felt like the whole place was shaking. We tried playing cards or heating up soup on the stove, telling dumb jokes to pass time, but almost every night around midnight we heard crying outside. At first, we thought it was just the wind howling, but it kept going longer each night. It sounded like someone crying softly and sadly, with no clear pattern or direction, just echoes rising and falling, giving me goosebumps. One night, Anna opened the door during the crying to see where it was coming from. The moment the door opened, the crying stopped. Outside, it was pitch black except for the porch light's faint glow. She stood there for a long moment, her breath fogging in the cold, trying to see or hear anything else. Not a sound. As soon as she shut the door, the crying started again. That's when she began to think something was out there, something playing with us. One morning, I went outside to check the generator and noticed more of those long, narrow footprints all around the cabin. I called everyone out to see. These prints were different from the ones we'd found before. There were so many of them, like whatever was out there had been circling us all night. We all looked at each other, unsettled but trying to stay calm. If it was a wild animal, why would it circle the cabin all night? Anna and I took turns staying up late, watching for crying or footsteps, hoping to catch more signs and finally figure out what we were dealing with. We left the blinds cracked just enough to watch the edge of the forest. Sometimes, when it was my turn, I'd see a flicker of movement, pale and thin, but it always ducked behind the trees just in time. Maybe it was just moonlight playing tricks. But once, just once, I saw something step out clearly. It looked like a person, but stretched way too tall. Its arms hung down awkwardly at its sides, and its body was so thin you could almost see the ribs through its skin. I couldn't see its face, but I knew I didn't want to. It never stayed long, just a few seconds, then slid smoothly back into the shadows. And I swear, every night the footprints grew more and more. One set of prints led right to the front door, like whoever made them had been standing there for a long time, listening to us. The crying changed the next night. It wasn't just sad anymore. It sounded like a plea, maybe even words hidden inside the sound. Pained and angry, none of us were sleeping well. We argued about leaving early, but we'd already paid for the cabin. Josh said we just needed to be careful and maybe carry bear spray just in case. On the 6th day, Josh and Caleb went ice fishing but came back early, both shaken. Caleb barely said a word, and Josh pulled me aside to tell me about the weird dead fish they found. The fish had chunks torn out, not just on top but on the sides, like whatever did it wanted to cause pain, not just eat. They also saw a set of prints that led to a hole in the ice, then back out. The prints were the same shape as ours, but deeper, like it was carrying something heavy coming back. That night, no one felt like cooking or joking. We sat quietly by the stove, eyes darting to the windows. The wind kicked up again, and every now and then, the crying would rise above the gusts. Raw, desperate, like someone about to lose it. Just after midnight, we heard frantic pounding outside, like running footsteps, followed by guttural cries that turned my stomach. Then total silence. I decided I had to see what was going on. Against my better judgment, I nudged Josh, and we stepped onto the porch with flashlights. Snow whipped in our faces, stinging our eyes. We scanned the area but saw nothing until Anna pointed to fresh footprints heading around the cabin's corner. We followed them slowly. At one point, there were dark drops staining the snow, maybe blood. Then the trail disappeared into the forest. We could have chased after it, but we didn't. Chasing that thing felt like a terrible idea. The next day, with less than 2 days left on the rental, I convinced everyone to leave early. It wasn't worth staying. We packed quickly, double-checking every window and door. But as we carried our bags to the car, we saw one last thing I'll never forget. Just past the tree line, the pale figure stood half hidden by branches. Its arms hung at its sides, fingers too long, eyes sunk deep into a hollow face. It trembled, almost like it was crying. For a moment, I felt pity. I could feel the despair coming off it, like it wanted me to understand. Then Anna grabbed my arm, urging me to the car. We drove off, throwing some salt behind us as a protective measure. No one spoke until we hit the highway. Caleb muttered something about never setting foot in the woods again. Anna just stared out the window, tears in her eyes. Josh gripped the steering wheel tightly, like he was trying to outrun the nightmare. I think we all knew then we'd seen something cursed. Bats seem cute when you watch cool animal videos online, but imagine one the size of a person watching you from the dark forest. Suddenly, life and death feel very different. Good night. I hope you liked this story from Shadow Trails. I'm your host, Raven Black. Follow me on X at Shadow Trails to share your own strange encounters. Help Shadow Trails become the top horror podcast by following on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and leaving a review. Support us at shadowtrails.com/join for member-only content and ad-free episodes. Also, check out our sponsor, Focus Fuel. Get 40% off the Focus Fuel bundle to improve your focus and rest with my link at focusfuel.com/shadowed. Until next time, stay safe out there. And stay curious, because this world is full of strange shadows. Not too long ago, after a tough streak, I found myself living in a rundown shack deep in the Missouri Highlands. That's where I ended up when I lost my job, couldn't manage the mortgage, and my home got repossessed. It was a dark time. My partner had died 3 years earlier, and ever since, life had felt like an uphill swim. Eventually, I just couldn't push forward anymore. When the bank took the house in early 2015, I reached out to an old buddy who owned a quiet place in southern Missouri, near the edge of a forest. He offered to let me rent it cheap, almost nothing, until I got myself sorted out. It sounded better than crashing in my pickup, so I packed what few things I still owned and headed that way. If you've never been to the Highlands, they're stunning and calm, but they give off a vibe like you've stepped into another time. The place I stayed was down a thin gravel road surrounded by tall woods that felt like they were keeping watch. The cabin itself was tiny and weather-beaten. No cable, no Wi-Fi, and the porch leaned noticeably to one side. Nights were completely black out there, and the nearest neighbor lived almost a mile down the road. I told myself the stillness might be good, might help me think clearly, deal with my wife's death, and figure out where to go next. For the first couple weeks, not much happened. Most of my days were spent driving an hour into town to apply for jobs at the public computer station, and my evenings went to small repairs, patching leaky spots or fixing warped floorboards. I kept to myself. At night, I'd hear the usual animals, owls, raccoons, maybe a coyote or two, but nothing unusual. Actually, I kind of liked it. There was something comforting about being wrapped in nature. I didn't feel completely isolated. That changed about 3 weeks in. One night, I heard snorting or sniffing right outside my bedroom wall. It sounded like some short-snout animal was pressing its nose to the wood. The sound was heavy and moist. I figured it might be a bear, but I'd lived in Missouri long enough to know how regular black bears breathe and move, and this didn't match. Bears give off a deep, gruff kind of noise. This had a different tone, sharper, sometimes squealing. I turned off the lamp next to my bed to avoid glare and tried to look out, but the night was too dark. When I cracked the window to shine my flashlight, the sound vanished. Whatever it was must have taken off the second it heard me. A few nights later, I spotted fresh tracks near the steps. They were big, but not the size you'd expect from a full-grown bear. What unsettled me most was the shape. The toes were too long and curled, and there was a weird arch to the print. Gave me chills. That same evening, I noticed scratches on the wall by the kitchen window. Not vertical like a bear trying to mark territory. These were horizontal, like something had stood on 2 legs and dragged long claws across the siding. The marks were deep and curved. They didn't match any bear sign I'd seen before. I started forming a theory. Maybe it was some odd type of bear, or something else entirely, roaming the woods near me. I didn't know if it was dangerous or just curious, but I knew it was out there. I'm no wildlife expert, but each day brought new signs. One morning, the trash bin had been knocked over. The lid was chewed and hanging half off, and I found odd hairs stuck in the hinge, grayish, thin, and wiry. The strands didn't look like bear fur, more like coarse boar bristles, but too long to be from a hog. As the weeks went by, the visits became more regular. At least 3 or 4 nights a week, I'd hear slow, dragging steps just beyond the porch. Sometimes, if the moon was out, I'd catch a glimpse of something hulking and hunched, moving through the trees. I never got a good look, but the parts one did see stuck in my mind. A thick, low body, a short, blunt snout like a pig's, and fur that looked sparse and patchy, like it was sick. It made my skin crawl. I kept trying to convince myself it was a sick bear, nothing more, but that theory felt weaker by the day. One night, I was in the back room when I heard something grumbling just outside the door. It had a frustrated tone, like it was trying to work something out. I didn't own a gun then, just a wooden bat I kept near the door. I grabbed it and crept close. There was a moment, long and drawn out, where we both seemed to be holding still. I could hear the thing breathing through the door. It wasn't panting. It was controlled, slow, heavy. I swear it could hear my heart pounding. Then it walked away just like that, vanished into the night. Things ramped up after that. It started scraping the windows. I'd wake up to the sound of claws dragging across the glass. Once, it left a smear on the window, an oily, nasty film that reeked. Took me hours to scrub it off. I started to fear the evenings. I'd light old candles around the place, not for light, but for comfort, like the glow might hold the thing back somehow. In between the visits, I was battling my own mess, dealing with loss, being broke, unsure what came next. The cabin felt like a cage sometimes, but it was cheap, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. My buddy told me I could stay as long as I wanted, and I wasn't about to go begging for a spot on someone's couch. So I stayed, hoping it would get bored and move on. Then the worst night came. It was late March, starting to warm up. The woods smelled like rain and tree sap. I was on the porch, pacing with a coffee mug, trying to unwind. But that feeling, like eyes were on me, hit hard again. Sure enough, I heard twigs snapping off to my left. I turned my flashlight and caught a glimpse. It was that thing, bigger than I remembered, stooped over, fur matted and thin. Its snout was short and wide, like a pig's. It was behind a tree, about 20 feet away. When it saw me, it let out this horrible grunting sound, long and rising into a shriek. Then it moved, fast. It lunged toward me, and I dropped my flashlight. I took off running, thinking I could loop back to the front door before it caught me. I slipped on wet dirt, and I could hear it, snorting, snapping limbs behind me. I tore through thick pines, running purely on fear and adrenaline. I swear I felt hot breath on my neck at one point. It was right behind me. I veered around a trunk and finally saw the porch light off to the side. I pushed with everything I had, slipping, half falling, and flung myself at the door. I yanked it open, dove inside, slammed it shut, and locked the bolt. I dropped to the floor, gasping. Outside, I heard that thing scream, a horrible sound like a dying animal, part moan and part pig squeal. It was right there on the porch. I heard the wood creak under its weight. My whole body shook, scratched at the door, and I prayed it wouldn't break through. Then silence, only my heartbeat and the hum of blood in my ears. That was it for me. I couldn't do it anymore. Within a week, I found temp work in a small town about 30 miles away, just enough to put gas in the truck and get out. I told my friend to keep the rest of my rent. I was finished. He didn't say much about the story I told, just nodded and said he'd check the place out. I thanked him again and again, but I never went back. These days, things are looking up. I've got a steady job and a tiny apartment, far from thick forests. I still have the odd nightmare about that night. I think that's expected when you've been chased by something like that. Whatever it was, I hope it never finds anyone else. I'll probably never know exactly what I saw, but now I believe there are things out there we don't understand. Things that don't want to be understood. Things that don't just watch from the trees, but follow, and maybe, when the time is right, hunt. To start, I was on a road trip from Seattle to Detroit. It's almost a 3-day drive, so I booked a few places to stay along the way. I didn't get too picky about the spots, but I picked Airbnbs so I could enjoy the trip more instead of staying in busy hotels. My first Airbnb stop was in Montana, and the road through that state doesn't pass many big towns, so the place I stayed was in a tiny town. It was probably only 2 or 3 miles long. When I crossed into Montana, it began snowing hard, which made the long day of driving feel even slower. By the time I reached the town, the roads were covered with snow, and the sun had already gone down. It was very quiet. I don't know much about small towns, but this felt exactly like what I imagined, especially in a sparsely populated state like Montana. I was hoping to find a fast food place like a Burger King or something for a quick dinner, but it was clear there wasn't one nearby. So I drove through the town and then turned onto the driveway for my Airbnb. It was a long driveway leading to a small house standing alone in a field. Tall pine trees, heavy with snow, lined the front yard. I parked on the side, grabbed my bag, and walked to the front door. I entered the code, went inside, closed the door behind me, and switched on the lights. The house was small, probably around 500 square feet, with just a living room and one bedroom. I took off my boots, dropped my bag by the bed, then sat down on the couch. Suddenly, I heard a thump coming from the bedroom. I looked toward the doorway I had just come through. It was pretty loud, but I had no clue what made the noise. I got up and walked over, turning on the bedroom light. Everything looked normal. I checked the tiny bathroom connected to the room. Everything was fine there too. The only other door in the house was the bedroom closet. I walked over and pulled the handle, but it didn't open. It seemed locked from the other side. At first, that felt strange. Why would a closet be locked? But then I thought maybe it was a storage closet the owner used to keep supplies. There was nowhere else to store things, so that made sense to me. I returned to the living room and closed my eyes for a few minutes, thinking about my plan for the next day. After about 15 minutes, I stood up again and went to the window to check if the snow had stopped and if the roads would be passable in the morning. Outside was dark and quiet, with no lights from the town behind the tall pine trees. The snow was still falling hard. I closed the blinds and turned back toward the couch, but then I saw a shadow moving inside the bedroom. It moved slowly and smoothly, like a door opening or closing. I walked over slowly, listening carefully, and peeked inside. Everything was where it should be, and nothing looked disturbed. But I was sure I saw something move. I kept scanning the room until my eyes landed on the closet door again. It was still shut, but I felt uneasy about it. I stepped forward and grabbed the handle. This time it opened easily, it wasn't locked anymore. But inside, it was empty, just a small walk-in closet. Before I could make sense of what I'd seen, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw a tall man standing in the bathroom doorway. He looked exhausted and beaten up, with scratches and cuts all over his face. When I stared at him, he didn't even seem to notice me. He stepped into the bedroom, bent down, and grabbed a dirty, worn-out bag from under the bed. Then he stood up and walked out of the room, ignoring me as he slowly left through the front door. I ran outside and watched him walk through the snow until he disappeared beyond the reach of the house lights. I tried to involve the police, but after describing him, they mostly contacted the Airbnb host. I didn't hear anything more after leaving that town. I think he was probably just using the place to rest, but the way he looked makes me doubt it. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had gone straight to sleep with a man hiding in the closet so close to me. I've lived in the same house for nearly 9 years now. It's a regular-sized home for a family, which made sense when I had roommates. But after they moved out and I ended up living here alone, all that extra space felt unnecessary. The house technically had 4 bedrooms, but I only used 2 of them. One was my bedroom, and the other was my gaming room. The other 2 rooms were at the far end of the upstairs hallway. One of those rooms had some old boxes stored in it, and the other was totally empty. One night, after finishing work around 9 p.m., I grabbed some dinner from McDonald's on my way home and headed straight to the gaming room. I was off the next day, so what better way to spend the night than playing video games? I put on my headphones and started up Call of Duty, but before the game could even load fully, I thought I heard what sounded like a knock on the front door. I took off my headset and listened carefully, but didn't hear anything else. I figured if someone was there, they would knock again, so I went back to playing. About 2 hours passed before I heard it again. A sound like knocking or maybe a door closing. But with my headphones on and my bedroom door shut, it was hard to tell exactly what it was. I got up and opened my door, peeking out into the hallway, waiting to hear the noise again. When nothing happened after a minute, I went downstairs and checked outside the front door. No one was there and everything seemed normal. Even so, after hearing those sounds, I double-checked the front door was locked before going back upstairs. This time I left my bedroom door open, thinking if the noise happened again, I might catch it better. I put my headset back on and resumed gaming. I played through a whole round, about 20 minutes. As the match ended, I leaned back in my chair and suddenly saw something move quickly past the open doorway, just out of my direct sight. I immediately yanked off my headphones and jumped up, terrified and unsure of what to do next. I just stared at the hallway, frozen in place for several minutes. Eventually, I got the courage to look further down the hall and through the rest of the house. Nobody was there, but the front door was unlocked again. When the police arrived to investigate, it became clear someone had been hiding inside. They were probably living in the empty room, a place I hadn't entered in weeks, maybe months. That meant all this time, they could have been right on the other side of the wall without me knowing. It's really frightening to think about, especially wondering what might have happened if I had accidentally come face to face with that person. Back in 2013, me and my buddy Valerie, along with 2 others, Corey and Darnell, heard stories about the amazing ice fishing and snowmobiling out near Glacier Ridge Lake. We figured it'd be a great chance to escape the usual grind and get a taste of the wilderness before heading back to our regular lives. We had no idea what we were walking into. The cabin we rented sat at the edge of a dense forest, one that felt oddly heavier and darker than we imagined. We arrived right before nightfall. The sky was already a dull shade of gray, and the air was freezing fast. The cabin was one of those weathered wooden places with a rusted stove in one corner and a couple of small bedrooms. It was warm enough inside, but there was something about how the wind rushed through the spruce trees that made everything feel off. It wasn't the warmest welcome. The first weird thing happened the very next morning. Darnell woke me up at sunrise and told me to come take a look at something. I followed him outside and saw that the fresh snow was littered with footprints, not round like a moose or a bear. These looked like human feet, but they were too long and oddly shaped. Each one showed clear toes, but they were stretched out way too narrow. The prints started from the woods, looped around the cabin twice, then vanished back into the trees. Whatever made them had taken huge steps. Valerie joked maybe it was some mountain giant out here. Corey, who was always the most skeptical of us, brushed it off and said he'd seen strange tracks while hunting up north. Still, it didn't sit right with me. I figured we'd be totally alone out there. But maybe we weren't. Later that day, not far from where we saw the prints, we found a half-frozen rabbit carcass. At first, we thought nothing of it. There are tons of predators in the area. But the wounds didn't look right. The fur had been ripped in long strips, almost like something peeled it back instead of biting it. Corey pointed out it looked more like a tool was used than an animal's jaw. That's when he started chatting with people in the nearest town while we were out grabbing gas or supplies. One older man working the register at a tiny roadside shop gave us this odd stare and mumbled something about the old ones in the woods. None of us paid it much attention. Just another spooky tale meant for campers and out-of-towners. We were out-of-towners, sure, but not idiots. Over the next few nights, the wind around the cabin really picked up. It was like the whole place vibrated. We tried passing time playing cards and heating canned soup, making dumb jokes to stay relaxed. But pretty much every night around midnight, we started hearing something outside. It sounded like someone crying. At first, we told ourselves it was the wind, but it didn't rise and fall like wind usually does. It was slow and sad, like someone sobbing under their breath out in the trees. There was no real direction to the sound, just waves of it floating in from everywhere and nowhere. It sent chills down my spine. One night Valerie opened the door during one of those crying spells, just to see if she could spot the source. The second the door cracked open, the sound stopped. Outside was completely black aside from the porch light. She stood there, breathing fog into the air, squinting into the woods. Nothing moved. The second she shut the door, the sound started up again. That's when she started to believe something out there was playing with us. A day or two later, I did a round around the cabin to check the generator. I found more of those long, narrow footprints, lots more than before. I called everyone out to look. It was different this time. Whatever made them had walked around our place repeatedly during the night. It wasn't just passing through anymore. It was circling. We all tried to act calm, but it was obvious none of us were comfortable. If this thing was an animal, why was it hanging around like that? So Valerie and I started taking shifts at night. We cracked the blinds open just enough to keep watch on the trees. Sometimes when it was my turn, I'd see faint flickers of something moving behind the trunks. Pale and thin shapes, but every time I focused, the figure would slide behind a tree, just out of sight. Could have been moonlight playing tricks. But one time I saw it clearly. It stepped out into the open only for a second. It had the shape of a man but stretched too tall. Its arms dangled past where elbows should bend. Its body was so thin, I could make out bones under its skin. I couldn't see its face, and honestly, I didn't want to. It didn't stick around long, just stood there, then drifted back into the shadows. Every night, there were more prints in the snow. One set came right up to the front steps, just stood there, facing the door, listening probably. That following night, the crying changed. It wasn't just sobbing anymore. It sounded like begging, like someone trying to say something, but buried under pain and rage. I thought I heard words, but couldn't make them out. None of us were sleeping much by then. We argued about leaving early, but Corey said we should stay. We already paid for the place, and he thought we just needed to be careful. Maybe start keeping bear spray handy. On the 6th day, Darnell and Corey went ice fishing out on the lake, but they came back early. Both looked disturbed. Darnell barely said anything. Corey pulled me aside and said they found mutilated fish, torn up from the sides, like something had attacked them for fun, not food. He also told me they saw another line of those prints going out to a hole in the ice, then back. And the ones coming back were deeper, like it had been carrying something heavier on the return trip. That night, nobody felt like eating or joking around. We sat near the stove, watching the windows, waiting. The wind howled, but now and then, that awful wailing cut through it again. Higher, louder, like someone in agony. Just after midnight, we heard quick stomping outside, like someone sprinting past the cabin. Then there were these strange growls or howls that made my stomach twist. Then, dead silence. I couldn't take it anymore. Against every bit of logic, I grabbed Corey and we stepped out onto the porch with our flashlights. Snow whipped into our faces. We scanned the area. Nothing. Then Valerie spotted fresh prints heading around the back corner of the cabin. We followed slowly. At one spot, we saw drops of something dark in the snow. Maybe blood. The trail ended at the woods. We didn't follow it in. The next morning, I begged everyone to leave. There were still 2 days left on the rental, but it wasn't worth it. We rushed to pack up, checking every lock and latch on the way out. As we dragged our bags to the car, I saw something I'll never forget. Just past the first row of trees, a tall, pale figure stood behind some branches. Skinny arms hung at its sides, fingers too long. Its face looked like a skull, sunken eyes, skin barely stretched over bone. It was shaking like it was crying. And for a second, I don't know why, but I felt sorry for it. Not scared, just sad, like it wanted me to feel what it felt. Valerie yanked my sleeve and told me to move. We jumped in the car and sped off, snow blowing behind us. No one said anything until we hit the main road. Darnell whispered he never wanted to step in a forest again. Valerie stared out the window. I think she was crying. Corey clutched the wheel so tight his knuckles were white, like he was trying to drive away from something way worse than what we saw. We all knew something had happened out there. Something real. Something we weren't meant to see. A few weeks before my trip, I reserved a rental house through a vacation site in a small town I'd never visited before. I was going there to meet a client for work who lived nearby, so I planned to stay just one night and then drive back home. The drive took around 3 hours. When I arrived and parked in the driveway, the neighborhood was very quiet. Most of the houses had their lights off, and tall trees blocked much of the yards from view. The only thing I noticed was someone walking down the street far away. Nothing seemed unusual about the person, but for some reason, it gave me an uneasy feeling. I went inside, unlocked the door, and settled in. The house was pretty ordinary. Not fancy, but perfect for what I needed. After looking around to get familiar with the place, I stepped outside to grab my other bag from the car. That's when I saw the same person from earlier, only now they weren't walking. They stood in the middle of the street, staring right at the house. As I headed toward my car, the person noticed me and started walking away. I watched them carefully, feeling suspicious, but they just kept walking down the road. I went back inside, locked everything tight, opened the garage, and pulled my car in to be safe. Over the next few hours, I kept checking outside to see if the person was still nearby. I never saw them again. I had to get up early, so I went to bed and slept fairly well, waking a few times but not for long. At 4 a.m., my alarm rang. It was still dark outside, so groggy. I sat up and noticed a light shining from under my bedroom door. I didn't remember leaving any lights on, so I figured maybe I'd missed turning off a kitchen light or something. I got out of bed and went to the door. Just before opening it, I heard noises from the other side. Sounds like something moving at the far end of the hallway. When I opened the door, I saw the living room light was on, which I was sure I'd turned off. The noise kept going as I walked down the hall and looked into the living room. There was a man rummaging through one of my bags. He wore a black hoodie and torn jeans, the exact clothes the person had on who I saw outside earlier. I stared for a moment, and he slowly turned to face me. He didn't seem surprised at all, as if he expected me. He dropped the bag and shouted for me to stay put. He started moving toward me, and I only had a split second to react. I turned and ran back to my room, slamming the door just before he reached me. He crashed into the door and tried to kick it open, then started fiddling with the lock on the other side. I thought fast, opened a window, and jumped out, running away as fast as I could. When the police arrived, the man was gone and so were my bags. Even worse, the bedroom door was now open. He had picked the lock and got inside. If I'd stayed hidden somewhere, I don't want to imagine what might have happened. The officers believed there was more to this man's visit than just theft. I can only hope he never finds me again.